Okay, I'm going to call this Plan Commission meeting for September 10th, 2018 to order. Roll call, please.
Chris Zellner.
Here.
Sue Springman. Here. Joe Zisselberger.
Here.
Brad Zeman.
Here.
Brian Malish. Tim Black. Chris Thomas.
Here. Okay, first item we have is minutes. Do we need any changes, or I'd look for a motion?
Second.
Motion by Sue Springman, second by, was it Joe?
Yep.
Joe Zitzelberger. Call the question, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Public comments. Is there anyone here that would like to address the board on an issue that's not on the agenda for this evening? So we have two, so if you can, stand up, state your name, address, and go.
Mary Ellen Kearney, 317 West Main. It's just a general comment about zoning, nothing specific. But the building codes in Waunakee cover height, lot line setbacks, and density measures. How well a proposed building will fit on its lot and look in an established neighborhood should also be carefully considered. I bring this up because of the new duplex that was built on the corner of West and Second Street. It's well built with quality materials, but it appears to be too big for the partial lot it's on. It does not fit in with the rest of the neighborhood and completely overshadows the east side of the cute older home it was built next to. In another location, on a larger lot, be a great addition to village housing, but now it just looks out of place. In the planning process, I think more attention needs to be given to the aesthetics of how a building will fit on its lot or property and complement the area and neighbors in which it is built. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want me to read, or you?
I have it written.
Okay, go ahead.
Mary Heibecker, 306 West 3rd Street. I would just, and I'm going to skip out early to do the school board meeting tonight, but I would just like the plan commission and the school board to try and work together to figure out 2 different nights to have these meetings. They're very important meetings. It makes it very difficult for citizens to be involved with all aspects of what is happening in the village when the 2 meetings are on the same night. Thank you.
Okay, any others? I'll just welcome back Brad Zeman to the Plan Commission. After a little hiatus, he's in for Pat McGowan. Pat had asked me November-ish, October-ish last year about potentially ending his term early, and I said if you could stay till June, July, somewhere in there, I'd really appreciate it, so we could get through some issues that we were going through at the time, and he did so. And Brad has put back in and has joined our commission again. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, new business. First thing is initial consultation for rezoning and comprehensive plan amendment for Legion property, 417 East Main Street, for an age-restricted multifamily project. So, back in February, I'm just going to read what I said so I can remove myself from the building, I guess, for the room. So I'm recusing myself from this project, and the reason is very simple. I'm doing in what I believe is best for the village. I want to avoid and want the village to be able to avoid the perception, incorrect as it would be, that my votes on the Plan Commissioner Village Board with respect to the creation of the TID 8 at the time, or the boundaries of TID 8 would be influenced by my brother's affiliation with LZ Management and his potential dealings with the American Legion. The best way to do that is to recuse myself from the process, which I'm going to be doing. Do they need to make a motion of who's going to chair right now, or?
I think that would be appropriate, yes.
Okay, so I'd look for a motion to designate a chair.
Motion
Two.
for the exclusion?
No, it'd be a motion for the chair, and typically the chair is the senior member from the board, which would be Sue Springman. So it'd be a motion to appoint Sue Springman as chair.
I'll make a motion to appoint Sue Springman as the chair.
Okay, motion by Brad Zeman, second by Chris Thomas. Call the question, all in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
And I'm just going to recuse my vote on that, too.
And then you're coming back for the next item.
I'll be
though.
back for the
We'll come
next
get
item.
you.
Perfect.
So we'll take up this item. Kevin, do you want to?
Just a little bit, in fact, it's an initial consultation, so we don't
It's not
have
for
much of an.
action tonight. This is just the beginning of a discussion.
Right, like Sue said, this is just an initial consultation to get initial feedback from the Plan Commission. At some point, it may be, if you're interested in proceeding, we got a housing study that's underway, you want to take that into consideration, if this should wait, or if it's okay to move forward, if it's an appropriate spot, when and if you might want to direct the applicant or whoever is proposing to do this to have a neighborhood meeting, to have some discussion before they come back again. We thought it was important, but before they go to the neighborhood, that they bring it to our plan commission, so you see it first rather than the neighborhood. And then you could direct them accordingly, because if it's a no-go, then, then why have a neighborhood meeting? If you're interested in having proceed, you probably want public input to the neighborhood, as that would be appropriate. Dan Zellner is here from LZ Management, and someone from the Legion. It's not a micro, it's a microphone for the taping of it only, so it doesn't amplify.
There's a chair up here if the gentleman from the Legion would want to come up here in case he needs to chime in.
I'll just stand up when he addresses me.
Okay, very good.
No, I never got PowerPoint.
Okay. We have a map, so that's good. Just for the record, I am not the village president's brother. I'm his nephew. My hairline might suggest otherwise, but so it's just so it's clear. No, thank you all for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Dan Zellner. I'm with LZ Management Company. We're a real estate development firm based out of Madison. I am a resident and grew up in Waunakee. With me here tonight is Andrew Stevenson, also a partner at LZ Management Company. Ed Lawson, who is the current he's a current post commander for the American Legion, Post 360 here in the village. And then also Herb Damstake, who's a past post commander, is also here with us. So thank you guys for being here. LZ Management has been working with the Legion for the last 18 months or so. And we've been trying to do two things. One, we've been trying to help the Legion solve their long-term facility needs. And two, figure out a way that we can redevelop their current site. We are working towards hopefully submitting a rezoning application to this commission in the coming months. Our intent tonight is just to share the current plan and hope to get initial feedback like Kevin was saying, and any concerns that you have up front that we can address early on in the process. Before we get going on the plan a little bit, just give everybody a little feedback on LZ Management, because not everyone might be familiar with us. We started in roughly 2000. LZ Ventures started in 2008, which is the parent company of LZ Management. We've developed, the partners in the group have developed 6 projects ranging from 12 million to 30 million over that time. Our two biggest projects are downtown Grand Central Apartments and XO1 Apartments, student housing right across from the business school on UW-Madison campus. Grand Central is 14 stories, XO1 is 8 stories. There's over 800 beds between those two properties. We also developed an 82-unit apartment building over in Greenway Station in Middleton. That was about 2 or 3 years ago. And we just completed, actually last month, the Deco Apartments, which is over on Junction Road on the far west side of Madison. That's a 172-unit apartment building. The partners as a group, we have over 100 years of experience in construction and real estate development. Several of the partners worked at one of the largest contractors in the state for 55 years. 3 of the 5 members grew up in Waunakee. A 4th one lives in Waunakee, so we're local in the truest sense of the word. But we also have the expertise to carry out the project that we're talking about tonight. So the potential development that we're talking about is really 2 projects, but they're tied together because one project can't happen without the other. The first project is going to be moving the Legion from its current site to a different site. And the site that we were looking to move to, that we're helping them secure, and that their members have preliminarily said that they're in favor of moving to, it's lot 11. Oh, perfect. So that's lot 11, obviously the one with the circle around it. And the business park, you can see Hogan Road on the very far right, and then Highway 19 is, I can't see it, but it's up above. The ice rink is right across the street, and then Octopi is right next to the ice rink. So what the Legion would put there is roughly an 8,000 square foot single story structure that would meet their current needs. So they have the fish fry, they have meetings where all the members come to. So this space would make it much more efficient for them to operate under their current needs. And the leadership is also hoping that they're able to incorporate some aspects that would cater to a younger generation of veterans to get them more involved at a younger age, because they're finding people aren't as involved early on in their adulthood, and after the kids leave them, they get involved. So it would be a great project for them. It's actually, they just told us a couple weeks ago that this is their 100th anniversary this coming year, so it would be pretty cool to give them a new building to kind of celebrate that as well. So the second project would be redevelopment of the Legion's current site. It took us a while to pinpoint exactly what we wanted to put on this property. It's a beautiful site. You can see 6 Mile Creek runs along it. It's going to be within walking distance of the new library, walking distance of Murphy Park, I think walking distance of the Village Center. So it's a great spot. And based on this location, as well as considering some of the other developments that have happened downtown in the last 5 years, as well as what's being constructed right now, we think that the best use for this is a 55 senior apartment project, affordable senior project. I'm sure many of you are aware of the Cannery Row apartments that are right across from the Village Center. It would be a very similar project in concept to that building. We anticipate about 100 units is what we want to put on there. And all of them would be affordable it'd be about 60% of the area median income would be the average for tenants in that building, which is about $36,000. We also want to keep the legacy of the Legion on that site somewhat intact. So one aspect that we want to include in the project is a set aside of a certain amount of units, and that's not specified yet, but we want to set aside a certain amount of units specifically for veterans and or their spouse. So their site is roughly 4 acres. Buildable, it's roughly 3 after you take into account the setbacks from the creek. I also think it's important to note, the houses in front of the Legion's property, that's not a part of the development. So I actually feel like the character of that block won't change that much as you're driving into town. The feel of that block, I think, will be very similar to what it is today, even after the building is constructed, which I think is a positive. Another aspect as being residents and drivers downtown during certain times of the day, part of the consideration for what we wanted to put here, or what we want to propose for putting here, is what it's going to do to the traffic downtown. And we think that senior apartments, they have a different rhythm of the traffic patterns, and understand that we'll have to back that up with some studies, but just based on Cannery Row's activity, I drop my kids off for school around there every day, and there's not much going on when everybody else is moving around in the morning. So anyways, just good fit, I think, from that perspective as well. I do want to be completely clear that the Legion's members have not formally approved to sell their current lot and or purchase lot 11. The membership is aware of this potential transaction, and a large majority has voiced their support to date. They had a vote several months back, just kind of give us your opinion, yay or nay, whether you would support something like this, and I think 98% were in favor of it. So that's good. And then assuming everything keeps moving along here, they're planning on voting. They're having a vote in October to get set up to sell their current property and to carry out lot 11, assuming we can get everything moving in the right direction here. Also note, we already reached out. We went door to door to those houses that are neighbors to the Legion and just said hi, introduced ourselves, asked if they had any initial concerns, and gave them our card and said, let us know if you have any concerns, as you might hear stuff in the paper or other places that may or may not be completely true. Just let us know and we'll address it with you. So they were all, some of them were concerned about certain aspects of it, but overall we're very appreciative that we reached out to them and seemed not to be opposed to anything at this point. But we talked to them for 5 minutes each, so I don't know for sure. So, again, I just appreciate the opportunity. We appreciate the opportunity to speak publicly about this for the first time. We've been working on it for a long time. We're pretty excited about it. Andrew and I specifically are very excited for the Legion. I think this would be a great project for them. We think the affordable and senior housing aspect to our project on their current site is something that the village needs. So we're excited about it, and yeah, just happy to address any questions or concerns any of you have at this time.
So this is not a public hearing, because this is just a, tell us about it initially. There'll be future meetings that are public hearings if we choose to have them come back. I just want to make it clear there will be, we don't have enough to really react to at this point in time. It's just very general, but I'd like to get the Plan Commission initial thoughts regarding this. If anybody has any?
Encourage that you've already reached out to the neighbors, you know, the feedback that, you know, you bring as a forum really resonates for us as a board, and your input is vital to the project, and it looks like you've done your legwork. I'm familiar with a couple of your projects as well, and projects I've seen and walked through are high-quality projects, so I'm not too worried about the construction and design of a project, but we'll see what comes together, and I wish you well through the process.
Thanks.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. Thanks for bringing it to our attention now. One question, do you know about how tall it might be? As you say, coming in, you don't really see behind those houses right now.
Sure, I mean, we're still in the final, you know, we're still tightening up the details of what the final construction is going to look like. But I would think it's, again, Cannery Row would be a good example. Not that it's going to look exactly like that, but that's a 3-story building, and generally that's one of the more efficient ways of building apartments. So, you know, we'll probably try to keep it around 3 stories. And if you look at the slope of that lot, it slopes down quite a bit from where the Legion's building is down to the creek. You know, we think we can blend it in really well in that site.
Good.
Do you have a feel at this point for how you might situate, you know, whatever construction on that lot?
Yeah, we've done a block plan to ensure that we can get 100 units plus or minus. And 100 units is important, not because it's a round number, it's just with the type of program that we're trying to use for the affordable aspect of this, there's a certain economy of scale where if you don't reach it, it just doesn't work. You know, the math doesn't work. We'd like to orient, I mean, the creek is an obvious selling point to the property, so we'd like to orient it towards the creek as much as possible.
Is it likely, I think with the houses that are facing Main Street there, I think at least a couple of them may have some access from the back.
They do, yep.
And is that something that is maintained here, or is there, I'm not quite sure where the lines and things are there, and if that's officially an alley, or?
That was one of the, you know, this house actually right here, I spoke to her. She just moved in 2 years ago. So that was a concern of hers. She moved in partly because it had that access.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't, like I told her, anything that we do is probably going to be oriented towards the creek, so I wouldn't anticipate that would be a problem.
Show us where that access is, I'm not exactly sure.
It's like, and I don't know if it was,
Is it an easement that exists?
I don't know if there's any, do you,
It is, and it's basically where that blue line is going east and west.
Oh,
so right here you can see they're not all connected to that. There's just a couple.
it doesn't
drives.
cross the property, it's just at the end of the property.
Right, so
Kinda
the
like
parking
if there
lot
were an
basically-
alley there.
Their parking lot runs into
Ah.
their back driveway.
So she can get out either through our new road that we built or over on that driveway that leads into the Legion, is that?
I guess what I'm saying is I'm anticipating that this is gonna be continued, she'll have access there.
Yeah, I'm just curious how
Yeah.
it works, yeah. Joe, or anybody, any other questions here?
No.
So you will be seeking a rezoning, and I don't know, village attorney has any comments on that in the comp plan and?
Well, for the land to be developed, there would have to be a rezone, because I believe it's zoned institutional right now. Exactly what it would be rezoned to, if this is something that's gonna move forward, I think at a staff level, we'd have to discuss that internally and then have some discussions with the developer and try to determine what the appropriate zoning classification would be. Whether or not there's a comp plan amendment, there's the potential that there would not need to be a comp plan amendment. There is language in our comp plan that this is, in the comp plan identified also as institutional. But there's some language in the plan that suggests or states that land that is zoned institutional, if it's no longer going to be used for that purpose, and is going to be used for a different purpose, as long as the new purpose is compatible with the adjacent uses, then there wouldn't need to be a comp plan amendment. So that's another issue that at a staff level, we would need to work through internally and then have some discussions with the developer. And I think if the Plan Commission would like to see this, further discussion on this topic, that's where we would have to get information with respect to exactly where would things be oriented, would there be screening, things of that nature, because I think that's when you get into how does it relate to the adjoining uses.
Would lot 11 have to be rezoned as well to institutional?
Which one is lot 11?
Business park.
Oh, that, I'd have to take a look. I'm not sure about that. That would be, it might have to be rezoned and it might have to be changed in the comp plan, but I wouldn't really view
I don't
that
think
as
so.
a.
We haven't looked at it in a lot of detail yet, but at first blush, it seems like it comply with the current zoning code that's in place on that property. Just a couple more comments. Tracy, you go back to the other drawing. Is that the village is undergoing a housing study, and that housing study is going to take well into next year, next spring, before it's going to be completed. So the question is, was there an interest in postponing this? And there are certainly some deadlines that they're facing in order to get funding and be able to apply for certain tax credits to do the affordable portion of this project. Is it okay with the Plan Commission to proceed while we're undertaking that housing study with the understanding that this project, as it be proposed, would have to comply with the current ordinance? So if there's a restriction, right now we have a restriction of 25% of our housing to be multifamily, so that 25% would apply as they apply for the rezone. That's when it's triggered. So they'd have to comply with the current zoning code as it's currently written, which is, I think it's reasonable and feasible for them to do that. But the question to the Plan Commission is that okay with you to proceed with this simultaneously while we're undergoing this housing study?
Get the 25% at this point?
They would, and the tricky part about that is, we have room right now, and what the code says is that you can't rezone a property that would allow for multifamily if we're over the 25%. Currently, we are not over the 25%. So it would meet the current ordinance as defined today.
I'd like you to elaborate a little bit on how you create this senior housing that's affordable for really probably people who are on Social Security and very limited incomes, which are a lot of people in the community. But the only way to do that is through a tax credit program. And the reason you need the rezoning, to explain that whole sequence of events, because most people would not understand why you need the rezoning by a certain date to even be considered, because it's not assured you get the credits.
Correct, so.
It's a competition.
Right, there's WIDA, Wisconsin Housing Economic Development Authority, right? Is that right? They have two programs. Every state has two programs. There's a 4% program and a 9% program. We're going to apply for the 4% program, which historically has been, if your project matches all the requirements, you automatically get it. But Wisconsin actually just passed that's a federal program. Wisconsin just passed a statewide 4% program itself, but they do it through a competitive application process, unfortunately. Everybody was hoping, and they just passed this in February, so we didn't even think this project had legs, and then Wisconsin passed this, and we were like, awesome. This is, we have a shot here, and they've been kind of ironing out the details of that legislation ever since. So the next application for the 4% program is in January. So by January, we would need to have rezoning or any TIF kind of buttoned up by them for us to apply for that competitive process, which we're working with Baker Tilly, who is a really well-known consultant in this space, probably one of the best consultants in this state in this matter. And they've looked at the application and they think we would have a really good shot of winning if we can get it to the finish line by the
So
application
if we were
deadline.
interested, we'd need to approve rezoning by the end of the year, so we've got time to talk about lots of different details.
Yes. Rezoning and
And then
any-
when do they award? And so a project wouldn't start till when?
Or 2 months later, generally,
Oh, 2
they give
months.
themselves, so that would be March. Then we would have to go through and find a tax credit investor and all these other things. So it would probably be summer July of next year.
And then, so not online till 2020 or something.
Right. Yep.
Can we back up there a little bit and get a little bit more into the details of what that timeline looks like?
Sure.
Because obviously, you're not gonna be able to do anything here until the Legion is basically up and running at their
Right.
location. So what does that kind of all look like?
Yeah, we'll have to iron that out. I mean, they have I think their biggest need is the fish fries for their, that's probably, I mean, I don't want to speak for them, but the fish fry is kind of the biggest thing they need the facility for. So that starts in October?
Correct.
October? And their building it's a single story, metal structure that takes a lot less time to build. So it'd probably be, we would be able to get that up, we hope, by the time they would need for the fish fry. So.
They ought to put a critical path together for both, and you would probably present that at a future meeting to show all the different steps.
Yep.
And you'll do a traffic study.
Yep.
And when's our housing study due?
Springtime is when we expect the housing study to be completed. And at the staff level, when we met with, we thought it was important to have this age restriction. And so if there is a rezone of this property, that there's a deed restriction on the property that would restrict it to 55 and older. We didn't think the Plan Commission would be comfortable at this point, without completing the housing study, to have an open market on that property. We thought that this would be more palatable to the Plan Commission, to the public downtown, if there was a deed restriction on the property that, hey, this can only develop if it's age restricted 55 and older.
So I'm glad you talked to the residents there, but I wonder if, what we would want to do, if we're interested. I'm excited about the fact that you would bring senior housing, because I hear from a lot of people who live here. I'd love my parents to move closer, but they can't afford to come here, and I'd love to have them here. It doesn't put a burden on the school system. Traffic is minimal, that kind of thing, but we want to see a lot more detail on all of that. If you had a community meeting, the question is, I mean, a public hearing is a community meeting, but you got all this other stuff on the agenda, and everybody feels stressed. We got to get out of here. So maybe we could have you have more of a community neighborhood meeting to talk about more details as a next step, if people are interested in this concept, and I'd have to defer to other people here.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, yeah.
I don't know how other people
No,
feel about it.
it goes back to that opening comment, is getting the community feedback, working with the village here, and making sure that everybody knows the surroundings and what's gonna potentially happen for the future. I understand the WIDA guidelines, so it's a path that I'm very familiar with, and talk to the board with as well. So really work with the board, work with the community, and get their feedback as well, but definitely reach out.
Don't need a.
We don't need a motion. My sense is the Plan Commission is directing us at a staff level to continue the conversation, figure out the process, and bring that back to you, directing them to have an open neighborhood meeting with the surrounding community in that area, and we'll report back next month.
I would put the caveat on that with the housing study that's out there, we're probably not in a big rush to approve a whole lot of things until we get to that point.
Yeah.
So is that saying you won?
No, I think it's great to pursue this, to continue down that road. When it comes time to give the final yes, all is well, hopefully that's somewhere in the same time frame as that study, or that we've gotten some of that housing study information back, ideally.
Well, if they need rezoning by
They
the
need
end of the
rezoning,
year,
yeah.
what
Prior
else
to-
do they need after that, which we would have to approve, which would, so if they had rezoning, which is deed restricted, to go in for an application,
If the
you'd
concern
still have
is,
approvals to come back to us, right?
yeah,
Site plan approval and everything?
I could understand a concern because the Legion, you want to make sure that they have a home, they have a place to go,
Yep.
that you could have a deferred effective date to make sure there's an agreement in place that the Legion has a place to go, if that's a concern. I don't think we're going to be far enough along in the housing study to actually do the rezone. And
The
that's why-
rezone, I'm not terribly concerned with.
That's
I
what we
guess.
offered, the
Okay, 'cause there's
age
other
restriction,
approvals.
deed restriction on the
Yeah.
property, to try and satisfy that.
Yeah,
that
the
housing study.
rezone, I'm pretty cool with the, actually
Deed restriction.
looking at, site plans and all that sort of stuff. I think
Yeah, that
Obviously,
that
we
certainly
move
can be,
further out.
past the first thing. In fact, you probably wouldn't put a lot of effort until after you found out about the award. You just need to have the zoning in place in order to pursue this.
Right, right. I mean, we'll have a set of plans drawn up, but they're, you know, they'll need some work after we find out if we, you know, ultimately win. I mean, they're a good set of plans, but the detail, there'll be some details in there that we'll iron out afterwards. But you'll get a great general sense of what the project is prior to that. I just wanted to clarify because there is an application in January, and there won't be another application until the following January.
absolutely.
So that's what I wanted to clarify.
So there'd be no pursuing it if we didn't rezone it at all. It'd just be dead until.
Right. We would need any rezoning or TIF agreements and all that stuff lined up by the end of the year.
Now, as far as any sort of TIF thing, is that something, I don't know that we could go far enough down that road.
Yeah, that's typically deferred at the board level. That's usually a
Yeah.
board level discussion, not a planning commission, even though you'll be involved when they do make application.
Yeah.
But whether or not there'll be TIF assistance is a broader question typically left for the board. Then, once the broad decision's been made, then you'll get involved in the details of setting up the TIF plan.
Yep.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris?
I checked my email, I didn't get it.
Oh, just for clarification, before Chris gets back, is, we have a number of zoning changes that are being proposed. In fact, none of those zoning changes would be needed in order to facilitate that project as per our current conversations with them.
So under the existing zoning.
Correct, the existing zone, they
What
can
they
comply with
need.
the existing zoning.
Did you do anything for me to come back in?
Come on back.
I can just take over again?
Yep.
Okay, next we've got discuss and take action on site plan and certified survey map, Occupy Building Edition, 1131 Unique Drive. Kevin?
Just as an introduction, certainly we've seen this at a concept level, we've reviewed it at a staff level, and we feel pretty comfortable. We have some technical issues to resolve, but they're pretty minor in nature. If you think it's appropriate, we can have their architect make a presentation, we can follow that up with some staff comments.
Happy to, if it's appropriate.
Sure.
My name's Doug Powell, I'm an architect from Everly Architects. A couple of the renderings of the project. On this page, I'll just kind of go have you page through Tracy if possible, and then I'll talk about what's on each sheet. And we can come back to any of the documents as you want to ask questions. A couple of elevations, talking about the new parts and the old parts. Key for the materials. Next sheet is, one thing that we'll want to talk about today is the proposed fence for the service court. So there's a comment in Ed's report about what that's made out of, and I'd like to talk about that with you. The civil plan, so we've updated this a little bit based on some of your comments. Not entirely as you'd requested, so I'd also like to kind of discuss that as well, but one of the requests was to add sidewalk along the south side here. That's actually, so that complicates our drainage across the site, so the sidewalk would end up having a bunch of flumes and grates in it, and more costly than we would like it to be, so we extended it to the accessible parking. So it connects there, but we didn't extend it all the way to the south. We also did extend it to public sidewalk near the building entrance, but not at this driveway entrance because we didn't think it really provided any access where it would be desired. So a little bit on the site. This is more of the same stuff, just and then in terms of landscaping, which is absent of detail and the appropriate meeting all the requirements, what we're doing with this project and a few other aspects of the project are the same way, is that landscape design, mechanical, electrical, plumbing are design build parts of the project. So those will be under the general contract, which allows the owner to pay for those services under the big construction contract, so he can pay for it out of his bank loan rather than having all that liquid cash to pay all of our fees. So what we've done is, and we've done this with other municipalities in the past and had it approved as a condition. But we've included the landscaping requirements, your ordinance, and your checklist, so that as part of the general construction contract, a landscape designer designs the final plan, and we submit it to you for approval before going on with the work. So that would be this. There's a few other things like that, I think, like mechanical screening and a few things like that. Once we locate those pieces of equipment, we can then design the screening for them and submit those. So I'd propose creating like a checklist of, if we're approved tonight with these conditions, for creating a checklist of additional items that have to come back to the village engineer for final sign off, final check off. The rest of this is just the plans of the building, but I think if we go in a few pages to the floor plan, we can talk about go back one page, this is fine. So this is the new addition piece from here over, and this is the existing facility. So in terms of some of the, what's going on in the building, this is gonna be a lot of bottling and packaging, and then storage of packaging materials, and then storage of finished product. We're adding some tanks here, so back in the existing building, we are adding some production capacity, and that's gonna be where your utilities people are gonna be concerned about the added wastewater. So it has some updated information on that too, if you're interested, or I can just share that directly with the utility. But mostly in the addition, again, that's a lower intensity area, so it's mostly just packaging and things like that, and then the new office space. So in a nutshell, that's where we are with the project, and I think we've got a contractor selected, and hoping to start some site work later this month or early October.
Back to the site plan. You mentioned fencing, that's a good one, Tracy.
Yeah.
Could you talk about the fencing
So
give
what
some
we
more
wanted
detail?
to do around here was create, because there's so much unsightly stuff happening back here, rather than trying to hide individual groups of items, we just wanted to create a service court, basically by providing an 8-foot fence that comes all the way around here down to the property line, and then connects back here to the back of the loading dock. So you can imagine that's a lot of fence, like 500 feet long of fence. We want it to be tall enough to hide almost, most of the stuff, but I'm sure you guys have seen how tall it gets stacked back there. A lot of that is going to be alleviated by the new warehouse space, which will take a lot of that inside. So I'm hoping that, you won't see much of that anymore. But generally, I think the fencing around here is going to hide some of the unsightliness. The specific comment in the report from Ed was that the proposed perimeter screen fence will match the materials of the building. So, as you can imagine, with going through the exercise of getting a cost put together for the building, it has risen substantially from what was originally planned, in the neighborhood of like $3.25 million now. And so the fence is one of the areas where we're trying to be economical and propose a more modest type of a fence rather than like a metal panel fence. So we're proposing at this time a chain link fence with privacy slats in it. And if you need an image to remind you of what, it's not the prettiest thing in the world, but it's also more pretty much kind of nondescript. So this would be the base proposal, if you'll accept it. It will do the job of hiding the service court. It won't, call attention to itself. We can get it in colors that will match the colors of the building, so.
Can you pass that around?
Absolutely.
A little bit of background on that. I asked Tracy to bring up the street view of the Public Works garage. We had some similar concerns at the Public Works garage about, we had some outdoor storage. We got some sand or other materials that are stockpiled, and that we wanted to create some fencing in order to screen it from the street side. well, the street view from Google is from 2011, and we put the fence in after 2011, so I can't show you that as an example. But it is similar to that, and I think it works well. I mean, I'm looking for Ed, we haven't talked about this.
No, I haven't seen any
He
of
hasn't
this.
seen it,
This
so I think
isn't the
he'd like
slant
to,
fence I'm used to seeing, that's a nice one compared to
No,
what
no, no.
I see those are the slants.
And,
They're all the same, sorry.
Yep.
I meant to like
That
distribute them or something and share.
Oh,
it's
they're
the
all
same.
same. Oh,
It's all the
yeah.
same.
Keep a copy at either end.
You know, the other thing I think is important, and the theories are here, is that there's a shared lot line. And if you guys remember back, there was a proposal to do residential that would, and there's a drainage way. Hey, I got a pointer, I think. Drainage way is right through here, you see, that's the double line. And so the residential would be on this side of the drainage way, and then it sounds like your fencing would go on here and then hook back up on the other side of the drainage way. And I think if we were considering, and I think there is a movement to approve the residential. And I think this is important to get the development here before the residential would actually occur, so that residents that would, and this is more of an affordable type of housing that he is proposing here, smaller lots and smaller houses, they would know who their neighbor is, so it'd be built out before the residential starts, which I think that would be important as opposed to after the fact.
And I would agree with that remark. You know, in the past, we've had some problems with this business, having a lot of pallets and a lot of equipment in the back. Again, this is an industrial park, and there are industrial users. We put high standards on our industrial park, and we're very well aware of that. And it's important for us to hold strong to these values. Actually, getting this project in, if there is a single-family subdivision that would come through, that they've got their forefront through. I'm a little uncomfortable with the chain link fence. You know, I think that goes back to the village planner, working on a landscape plan. This is gonna be larger square footage. There's gonna be some more plantings that go along with it. But we've had some difficulties with them in the past, and I wanna make sure that we don't make it too difficult for them, that they can't make this expansion, but we also wanna make sure that all of our tenants in the industrial park are held to the same standards.
Yeah, without having seen this, if I could encourage your landscape plan to include vines along here. They grow fast, they're easy to maintain, and depending on what you choose, they're very inexpensive. And within 5 years, you could cover a substantial part of that fence. I can show you a picture of my own yard. Fall clematis right now, it's fragrant, it's white blossoms. It fights back the voluntary grapes. It's that hardy a plant. So it'd be nice for the neighbors, but more importantly, it would really enhance and reduce the impact of 500 feet of this. I'm
Right,
concerned about
right.
500 feet of this.
Right.
And then the other question I have then is the operation and treatment of your gates.
Right.
Or what you're planning on doing there.
Mhm.
Because it doesn't help to have a lot of money spent on 500 feet of fencing and keeping everything below 8 feet, but you've got 18-wheelers coming and going. And how are you planning on operating these openings, and what do
Yeah.
I see in the openings?
Yes. Oh, you've got a picture.
I have an example. This is
I
not
think
Public
this
Works,
is
Waunakee
the example
Utilities.
we've been working off of too.
Okay,
This motorized gate that rolls,
so it's a track or
Mhm.
guided gate, yeah,
Mhm.
which is good in the snow.
which is here, right?
Yeah, that's Waunakee Utilities.
open this
It's down the block from where you're proposing to be.
Yeah.
Yep.
I was also looking for Google Earth images.
What's on the left, but it's what he's proposing on the right. I don't know if I can get any closer.
Good swing gate. Yeah, there you go. I mean, sliding gate.
Yeah, so that's what we're proposing to do. Now, operationally, when they're open and closed, I'm not exactly sure, but I'm assuming they'll default to have them closed, and open them when they've got
When there
trucks incoming.
may be high volume times of deliveries, and I understand all that, but they're usually operated by some kind of an electric motor. If the electric motor's down, we expect it to be fixed, things like that.
Right.
What do we need to do tonight? Exactly here.
The site plan is in order, the certified survey map is in order. If you're comfortable, you certainly can defer to me to approve all the outstanding technical issues as a condition of approval. If you want to see additional details, come back to you. I think you need to ask for that.
I'll ask you guys how you feel about that.
I think the only thing that's really outstanding is this fence, is is this type of fencing gonna be acceptable to the plan commission? I'm comfortable because it's a standard that we set ourselves in terms of Waunakee Utilities and the Public Works.
Back to the site plan, the other alternative is enclosing smaller areas all around the site, so you've got lots of fencing in different places as opposed to
Yeah.
a continuous fence, which,
So, yeah, I mean, back there, we've got, lots of stuff stored back there, right? There's like, a trailer that gets like waste grain, and
oh,
there's
yeah, I've seen
stacks
it.
of.
Got a lot of stuff, yeah.
I don't think that he'll need the shipping containers anymore after we've enclosed it and provided the, because that's where he puts like material that can't fit inside that's not waterproof. So a lot of that stuff's gonna go away, but there's gonna be now 3 loading docks. He's got a handful of different dumpsters, and it's almost too chaotic to try to go after each individual piece. It makes more sense to just enclose that area because it's so active back there, that it changes probably on a weekly basis where they've stored and staged things.
If there is a way of committing to introducing plant material, making it a green fence,
Yeah.
I think that would be acceptable from my perspective. I tend to agree that it's, I don't want to use the word chaotic, it's the only one that comes up in my head right now. There's flexibility and fluidity in your product and your movement. So I would rather you have the flexibility of your operating yard and guaranteeing some kind of a bigger screen so that accidents don't happen and things aren't overlooked.
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
making any sense.
I know.
I guess we're getting comfortable, Ed and I are comfortable with the fence. It sounds like if we add some plant material for the fencing, and I think it's also important that we don't have visible storage above the fence.
Of the
So-
8-foot line.
So whatever is stored within, that's not visible from the street.
And that the areas around the fence are maintained, because that's what I
Yes.
see. The fences go up and then there's weeds all over on the outside of it, because you're not looking at it, nobody's taking care of it, and then the people on the outside are looking at it. So if that can be,
As long as Ed's vines don't look like weeds, then we'll be.
Well,
is this the color of the fence
a lot of
versus
sound
the
barriers on
brown?
interstates that look wonderful because
That-
of the vines.
That
They're not
we can.
maintained.
That's close to what I was thinking.
I
That
like
was
the
best
darker
image.
color than
Yeah.
the brown, because the brown reminds
Yeah.
me of a wood fence, but.
Yeah. I think we would go for something dark like
But
that.
have you talked to Tierney about it? Is there any concern? or
No,
comment?
this is the first we've seen it. But I think that's a good suggestion.
I think we should at least make sure that they,
If you remember,
Sound
they had
is the
proposed their
biggest
own fencing and landscaping between the backyards and that drainage way as part of a condition of the approval of the residential. So this is a place where it might have some double fencing, because, this is not a residential type of fencing you wanna look at in a backyard. I suspect that the fencing that the Tierneys are gonna be proposing would be at a more residential scale and not this industrial scale.
It is, it's got piers and wood infill panels and then substantial landscaping. Remember, we had cut those sections through there.
Yeah,
So the
our fence
fencing-
may not run along the entire back property line either. So it may not act as a buffer between the two districts completely.
So I'm not going to suggest that it has to happen, but originally there were actually some discussions of putting plantings further away, but they couldn't because of the stormwater easement. So you might talk to the Tierneys if there's a way to partner on some of this. It would enhance both projects.
probably makes sense to have a discussion to make it work, particularly with stormwater and just aesthetics and.
Yeah, I mean, there's a window of opportunity here.
So the lighting and fencing was an item in Ed's comment, so, and now they have the understanding that they'll have to incorporate some greenery into the fencing, as well as that no visibility above the 8 feet will be incorporated into it. So the motion would still be the same, it's just with the understanding, we're adding a little bit more detail in terms of what that fencing is gonna be in just the green area and the visibility of storage.
Yep.
Okay, so would anybody like to make a motion on how to proceed?
I'll
Joe?
move to approve with all outstanding issues to be resolved to the satisfaction of the village engineer.
Okay, motion by Joe Zitzenberg,
Second.
for Sue Springman, second. Any other comments?
May I ask a question before you vote?
Sure.
Is the language in these reports binding? So do we need to amend any of this language where we differ in our approach from the recommendation,
You'll
such
have
as on
to-
the sidewalk?
You'll have to convince me that it doesn't apply, and I'm with you on the sidewalk, if that's the one you're concerned about.
Yep, pretty much.
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Got a motion, a second, call the question. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we got discuss and take action on proposed facade improvements, Rice Properties, 1001 Arboretum Drive.
Yeah, there's a proposal to upgrade the facade of the Reese property, which is on Arboretum Drive. Certainly, we didn't circulate at staff level, because we felt it was appropriate, at least I did, felt it was appropriate the way they're proposing. It's a substantial improvement to what the current building is, and that we, at least at the staff level, we'd recommend approval as proposed.
Commission members, any questions for Kevin? I agree with him. We talked about this in a tech
Nice
staff
to see.
meeting.
Yep.
It's a good improvement to the building, so look for a motion on this
I
one.
move approval of the facade improvements.
Motion by Susan Springman,
Second?
second by Brad Zeman. Any other comments? Call the question. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. And we've got some public hearings. First one, public hearing and discuss an action on a request by Steve Monk, 206 Winston Way, for a conditional use permit to construct an airplane hangar. So we'll first have the staff introduce.
As an introduction, this is a proposal to have built an airplane hangar, and why it needs a conditional use is because these airplane hangars typically require more height than a standard storage shed. And there's been some pretty active conversations between a number of the residents that use the runway actively, that have hangars, and about the setback requirement. And don't know if we got final resolution yet. I'm suspecting we're gonna find that out as part of the public hearing process tonight.
Okay, so then I'm gonna open.
Well,
Or should
I
I
would
have-
like to hear from the applicant what the final proposal is, because there was, the initial proposal was submitted, it was changed based on some input from some of the neighboring properties. The Airport Association raised some concerns in terms of the required, at least according to FAA and others, this space that should be left open. I think we're getting there.
Sorry, it locked up, I had to close out.
There's a 65-foot setback in terms from the runway to have a clear zone in case, one of these airplanes would go off course. At the staff level, we're certainly supportive of, while that requirement was a deed restrictions on those properties that was put in place in the 1970s, and the deed restrictions have expired, we still think it's appropriate, and there's public purpose in terms of keeping that setback at the 65 feet requirement, which was initially a requirement of that particular plat. So with that,
Mr. Monk here to present? Yeah.
I've got some pictures, I wish I would've known about the PowerPoint thing. I don't know how many sets, I think I got 7 or 8. And I have them in order, so if I get confused.
Thank you.
You guys
Thank you.
probably don't want to keep one myself.
Why don't you keep it, we'll share.
You can say.
I had a
In the
word
camera.
prepared here, but things changed even an hour before the meeting, and I don't
Put these in the file.
I don't even know how to say it, but anyway, I'll start, see where it goes. I'm Steve Monk. I'm here to ask for a conditional use permit for this hangar Waunakee. So you can see there's probably 30 or so homes that already have hangars. So I love living on this airport. This is awesome. I can sit on my deck and watch planes all day. The one thing to improve it for me would be to have a hangar. I think That's right.
Yeah, yeah, yep.
Yeah, so, so I originally asked the village, because I knew the deed restriction had expired around the time I bought the building, or the house, like 14 years ago. I knew the deed restriction had expired, so I asked the village, I think it was Tracy, maybe, I said, what are the setbacks, what do I have to do? And they said, well, 20 feet from the property line is the standard setback, so that's what I did. I originally applied for that. And then had some people come over, we talked, we had put out tape measures. We didn't have this map at the time. But what we did is looked in line of things that are already on the runway, and then they asked me, well, could you push it back to maybe 40 feet? And I said, I can do that. But I didn't want to go too far because my yard slopes, and the farther back I go, the more fill I got to bring in, and it gets closer to the house. So I said, yeah, I could do 40, and then I guess recently we've had a reason to push it to 45 because of these lines. I don't know, Joe, you can probably explain this to me better, where the 45 came from. I understand the 65 is not a good number that's been floating around. But yeah, Joe will speak in a. So I updated my application. I turned the hanger, I pushed it back, and then I'll talk about the pictures here. Maybe you can see what's going on better. Sorry, not everybody can see these, but so the first one is a picture of the windsock and the gas pumps. And the windsock is about 29 feet off the property line, and it doesn't show up in that picture. The fuel pump, which is actually here, is it's 35 feet off where the property line would be. So 40 feet would be inside of that, and but we're using that as a line, as a kind of a guideline. And the second picture shows a tree on the other end of the runway, and it's over here, that it's exactly 40 feet off the property line. And actually, I never even knew that until somebody pointed it out to me, because, I've flown in and out here, probably over 1,000 landings here, and that tree never concerned me at all. So it's 40 feet off, and I said, okay, well, that's a line between those two should be acceptable. And like I said, the talk 45 would meet the FAA requirement. Well, actually, the FAA has no requirements for this airport because it's uncontrolled. I talked to the FAA, two guys from the FAA several months ago, and they said, not a controlled airport, we don't.
All right, we're gonna try and bring up your
don't care.
pictures here so everybody in the audience
Okay.
can see.
The next picture, go ahead. Next picture is it's a Google Earth picture. You can kind of see the line, the fuel tank's at the bottom, that big tree's at the top, and a line straight through is the 40-foot line that I've been talking about. Picture after that is more of our
Yeah,
yard.
here. Hold on.
Oh, cool.
The warm orange glow.
Where are we now? We're not, okay, we're on we missed the windsock. I don't know if you want to go back to
All
those
right,
pictures.
we can go back to the side.
Spectacular.
I know where that one is.
Took them myself.
Gee, Mr. Rogers.
Wait, that's backwards. Anyway, that's flipped, but yeah, that's I don't know if I can even talk about it backwards. So this is the property line, that's the windsock. That's the fuel tank, and it's about the 40-foot line. Like I said, it's never been a problem. We're always, well clear of that. And I lost my order. The second one was the tree. I was talking about this backwards is really messing me up. But here's the property line, here's the tree, that's 40 feet. And I said I've never even noticed that tree, it's so far away. That's why I was thinking, and the hangar would, would want to come up to about maybe halfway. So the next picture was like my Google Earth thing. That, backwards, it's messing me up. Okay, there's the hangar, and then the line goes right up to that tree at the top there. I think Joe's got better lines officially from the FAA, so. But you can see some of these features. And that one
That's the yard backwards again, but, and this was a garden that was there that, this was the previous tenants. So we kept trying to keep it going, but it was built, had railroad ties and all sorts, you know, we said, I'm gonna flatten that, and that's kind of where I wanted to put the hangar about here. Now it's moved back, and it might move back just a little bit further, but so if it goes down the slope towards my house, it gets more and more difficult. Oh. And that's an actual picture of the backyard. There's the, you know, see the hump from the garden. I've taken the railroad ties out already and tried to smooth it a little bit. The property line is actually beckons behind the power, all the power boxes are pretty much on the property line. Okay. And, oh, well, you can't really tell. This is my yard. This is starting at the bottom, and there is a slope that goes up, and that's what I was trying to avoid getting too far down the slope. So I guess that's about all the pictures, but so I didn't plant any of this stuff. All the trees, all the gardens were there when I moved in. I've been enjoying them, but well, then if you go back to that slide you had with the lines, I could talk about that a little bit. So, and I'm not sure if this is the line we're supposed to stay behind, object free area here. And you can see that, you know, the gas tank is in the object free area, but so I'd have to go back just a little bit from the gas tank to stay out of that, which is maybe where the 5 feet we were talking about comes from. And you know, I'm all right with that. What I don't want to happen is have a big going back to the original thing, which says I can't have anything within 5 feet off the ground all the way back to my back deck. It means all this stuff would have to come out. The original, you know, one of the things of the material. And I said that's, you know, if any major thing has to change like that, I just soon pretend it's never happened and I didn't build it because I don't want to hurt this airport anyway. I'd like to keep it like it is, other than make it worse, or you know, by being overly restrictive. And I think, you know, addition of more hangars would be a big benefit for the airport. I've got my plane is down over here right now. And several people ask if they could rent it or buy it, you know, when I get my hangar. And I said I haven't got my hangar yet, so. Anyway, and I also think let me see. And I don't know if it shows on here, but this is well, you know, this is a recommendation. Right? This isn't a fixed rule that has to be followed. This is more of a guideline. And another thing, you know, the air park that is presenting or bringing up these things. About half of the people that live on the airport aren't in the air park. The air park is the association of people that bought the runway. And I'm one of them. There's several people here that bought part of the runway. And some of those people that bought the runway are thinking we should be one place, and someone's thinking we should be another place. So it's not like a unanimous, everybody in the airport thinks it should be here. There's a few people that think, you know, so we're kind of all over the place on that. So. Like any good group, there's some conflict, and we're trying to work that out. So I guess that's all. Any questions?
Okay, so we'll have our public hearing now.
Okay.
For this. So are you?
Well, do we? I guess first of all we have to open the public hearing. Did you do that?
Yeah. Are you?
Did you register
during the public hearing? Do you mean? Do you want to speak during the public hearing? Yes. Okay. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's coming.
Yeah, that's
It's
what we're
coming.
gonna do right now. That's what we're gonna do right now. Yep. So
You're not part of the formal
I didn't know if you were part
presentation.
of what you were presenting. So okay.
Oh my God. Safer questions.
So all right. So we're gonna open up our public hearing.
These are zoning.
Joe Drosky? That's you?
Joseph Androwski, I live 5992 Woodland Drive on the south side of the airport. But when you use your picture up here, I'm also the operations manager of the airport. This, of course, is the picture from the DOT, Department of Aeronautics. And as what Steve was trying to explain to you, these white lines define the airport runway. The rule is, or rule of recommendation by them, is that you have to be 125 feet from the center of this runway. And this orange line out here that goes all the way around here is 125 feet from the center of the runway. The number that Lynn Erickson gave you was not measured that same way. He was measuring from here. Nevertheless, this is what the state recommends, and if Steve would go back, this is 40 feet from his property line. It's 45 feet, I'm sorry, 45 feet back from his property line. So I would recommend that, just based on the legality, that you would approve the application of these 45 feet or greater. Most of the discussion about whether you should do it or not is aesthetics. Oh, it's going to look terrible. It's out there in the middle. You know, I don't have a view of the runway anymore. Well, my house, which is down here, I don't have a view of the runway either because I got to look between two hangars. You know, it's just a little tiny view. But hey, that's the way it is. So that's the way I heard most of the discussion. Is that not going to look good in here. So based on the legal part of it, I don't see why there should be a problem if he goes 45 feet. It would be 45, 50, whatever you guys can decide. There you go.
I didn't get to sign the paper, but I'd like to.
I'll allow you.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Just say your name and where you live.
Catherine Durkin here, and I'm at 200 Winston Way, so looking at that picture, my house is the trees with the blue block. That's cool. So I know there is mention of aesthetics. I am not a pilot, although I am a member of the association. I don't fly, never did. When my husband and I purchased the property, we purchased it because we liked the open property. And yes, I understand that on the other side, there are many hangars, but if you also look at the properties, they're much larger. So they can hold the very large hangars. The property on the north side, or where we're looking to build, is very small. There are hangars on those buildings, but they butt up to the houses. So yes, I understand the covenants has changed, but I think some of the other things that we do need to take in consideration is why people live in those houses, why they purchased the houses. It was not because we are all pilots. And yes, I enjoy the runway, but I also enjoy the open feel that I purchased. So again, it's just I want to share my concerns. I have another concern, and it's probably more based on what has just happened in the past month. My property is the second lowest property on that runway. And in the front of my house, I am the lowest property on that runway. And we all know in the past few weeks we've had a lot of rain. And it pretty much goes around my house or sticks around there. I'm concerned that there is a very large footprint that no longer has the ability to suck in water into the ground. It's now going to continue to drain around my house. So I am concerned about that also. But I do feel that I wanted to express my concern about opening it up and having a whole bunch of gigantic hangars on much smaller lots than the ones across. So, thank you.
I have a,
Well, let me.
Let's get it
close.
finished the
Let me
whole
just
year.
make sure there's nobody else. Anybody else that would like to speak on this?
Yeah, I'd like to speak. Yeah, my name is Gary Beimers, and I'm a member of the association. I think Joe spoke for, we had a meeting last night at length, and the disagreement was, if anything, to move it farther back than that. We don't want to restrict people from doing what they want. By the way, I live 5944 Woodland Drive on the south side of the runway. When I built my hangar, I abided by the setback limitations that were in effect at the time, and I brought in 70 loads, dump truck loads of fill
to get it to do that. My point last night was, if the building isn't there, you won't run into it. It's just a safety issue for me. Not only is it physically there, and the closer you encroach towards the runway, it's a very, very small percent for sure, but it increases the chance that somebody's gonna make a mistake. Crosswind landing, even the turbulence that's created and crosswind situations is significant here. I've come over the final approach end, and you just have to really be on your toes when there's a crosswind in effect. And if there's one building that's farther out than the other ones, I don't want anybody to have to do an aerodynamic study out here to prove it's safe, but the point last night that a lot of people discussed, and then I thought we agreed on a different number, but I just think the farther back it is, the safer it is.
Yours was first.
Yes, my name is Lynn Erickson. I'm the general manager at the airport. And the number that we used last night was based on what the textual description of setback is. It's from the center of the runway. Now, I know Joe pointed out to you that the center of that runway is somewhere in the grass next to the runway, but that's not where people land. People land on the runway. So when you talk about displacement from the center of the runway, that's where they figure that safety zone. It's from the center of that runway to either side. Now granted, they have this set up as if it's down the center of this air park, but the center of that runway, which is about 70% of our takeoffs and landings, it doesn't represent that additional 15 feet that goes above that. That's why when we're talking about these differences, our recommendation of the members that own the airport, of which we voted on last night, decided to go to 65 feet. What that does, and where I measured it, was at that corner where you see here, at this corner right here, went to the survey stake, measured to the center of the runway, it was 30 feet, and I measured beyond that, further out to the north there, north is upland, and came to 65 feet to make the 125. That's why when we discussed it last night, we voted on it as a group of owners, that it became 65 feet. We were originally trying to accommodate Steve as much as we could, but when we took a look at that, then we had our concerns. The Bureau of Aeronautics comes through and they look at this property regularly on what we do. They like our setbacks, and the original setback, understand the original setback was 120 feet. So we're going to 65 feet. We're changing that significantly. We're offering more space for people to construct out there without getting into that safety zone. Now that safety zone, like I said, if you have trouble, it's not because you're on the left side of that runway in the grass. If you're on the runway and you have trouble, you need that 125 feet. And that's where it impacts that right there. Thank you.
My name is Melinda Nelson. I live at 112 Winston Way on the runway, on the south or north side of the runway. And no one has mentioned the fact that there are utility boxes all along there on our property lines, all along. So long before any airplane hits a building, they're going to be taking out utility boxes if there is an accident like that. So it hasn't happened yet, and I feel that they should have the right to put the hangar out further because it impacts their backyard. And if they have to have it up against their house, it blocks their windows, look out onto a building. It's going to hurt the property value. The vote he talks about last night was very close, and I was one of those who did not agree with the 65 feet. I'm on the 45 foot. I agreed with that, which is what they're trying to do. So I just wanted to mention the utility boxes are there.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, then I'm gonna close. Yes, sir.
I'm a pilot at the airport. I fly in here frequently.
Can you give your name and address?
Joseph Bryan. I don't live on the airport, but I own a hangar there. and I fly in and out frequently, and, I kind of like to have that extra footage. The reason being, I know the utility boxes are there, but you can fly over the top of those and make your corrections before you touch the ground. So having that extra cushion, for me as a pilot, I would like to have. So that's my reason I go along with the 65 feet, is I feel like it's a safety issue. And I don't know about our insurance, if it will affect that or affect our, Lynn, have you checked into that?
I have a call into our insurance agent about that.
Okay, you guys can discuss.
Okay, but that's one of the issues that I'm concerned about too, is could they say, well, we're not gonna insure you because this building is put here. And also, I think it's a precedent-setting issue, because when you get one hangar out there like that, then you're gonna have every single one along there. It may take several years, but eventually there'll be a whole row of hangars along that lot. So the utility boxes, I think we can fly over top of those.
Anybody else? Okay, I'm gonna close the public hearing.
I was just going to request a clarification. I think somebody said something 4 or 5 testimonies ago. When I first looked at this image, I thought it was an oblique, because I assumed that you were talking about the center of the runway being in the center of the white and yellow lines. And it looks like it's offset 1/3, 2/3. But somebody just said that the actual center line is in grass, that it's not the paved runway. So what I strongly recommend is that you get some dimensions across there that clarify that. It's really hard to visualize all these dimensions being thrown out and looking at that photo. I can't process it. I'm pretty good with graphics and numbers. So if the image is, it's hard for me to comprehend these offsets, because as everyone was talking initially, until the gentleman here stated that the center line of the runway zone is actually on the grass. It's not in what I call the runway, the paved runway. So was that originally a grassy runway? Is that why the paving is off-center? Anyway, short of it is, I would encourage that in future discussions, we actually understand the dimensions of where the center line is and where the planes land, because I think that's an important part.
So, I'm assuming none of us were on this commission when the airport was established. Is that fair to say? Okay. And I don't know all of your backgrounds and whether or not you're pilots or not, but I know that I am not a pilot and don't know. I have a brother-in-law who's big into this, but I'm going to always lean towards whatever's safest for the community as a whole. And that's where I'm going to fall on this one at this point. I guess I'm having a hard time understanding the 65 feet. Is it possible to do the hangar 65 feet back? I don't even know that.
I wouldn't build it there. It's
Is that like right up against your house?
not
Like,
right up against, it's near the wall, maybe.
And there's a slope.
And there's a slope, yeah. I mean, I burned my grass in full power up that slope, when I put the plane there to see what it would look like against the house. Because I did have architects come out and draw me something for what is it going to do against the house. It blocks 2 of my bedroom windows, so they'd have to come out and couldn't use them bedrooms anymore. It blocks my dining room, my kitchen, and the breakfast area, so.
So I guess
75% of the.
my question in what has changed today since the original? Why they wanted the setbacks where they were? What's changed to cause it that, okay, we're okay with coming closer to the runway?
Almost 10,000 landings would.
Well,
that's my.
The covenants had expired.
I understand the covenants have expired, but what I'm getting at is, why did they have them there in the first place? When what's changed that we would consider moving it
I
closer?
think the original covenants were done incorrectly. You notice the difference between 100 feet and 125 feet. The original covenants were 120 feet. And they probably had the same ruling back in the 60s when that came about, whatever the date was. But they measured from the property line rather than the center of the runway. And it's stated by the DOT, it's from the center of the runway. Now you talk about the blacktop. Well, yes, we usually use the blacktop as a runway, but we also use the grass. you're gonna have 50% of the people use the grass. We have 2 runways essentially.
Grass only on the south
South
side.
side.
Grass
South
on the
side.
south
North side
side.
grass is no-go zone, so.
So I'm gonna,
So yes, the center is between the 2 white lines.
understood, yeah.
You know how close the furthest hangar is away from the runway, the center of the runway? Both pavement and
Which side are you talking about?
just either side.
I know
How
trees
far
are-
the closest hangar is?
Trees right on the property line, but there's.
There's one that's just off of the screen here to the left. If you want to move it over to the right just a little bit, you can see it right there. I believe that one is, that's probably 30 feet more. That's probably, I wouldn't say for sure without measuring it, but it's probably about that, that 125 yard line or 125 foot line, the amber one there. It's probably 30 feet beyond that still. But the difference we're talking about between what they measured as the center and that is only 15 feet, so it's only half of that, in effect, what we're talking about.
From the pavement. Other comments?
I have
Or
one more
questions?
question.
Susan?
I'm confused. I don't know about the rest of you, but I mean, I am very confused as to what is what based on, I understand your need not to wanna have it really close to your house. I totally get that. I also understand the need for safety. But those lines, as you say, are confusing. I would like to see a better depiction of where everything is and what is the furthest thing out. And relative to covenants, I mean, I think covenants only expire because they have to by statute. Personally, I don't think they should expire, because if they were meant to occur, I have this problem in subdivisions where you build a house and you have covenants as to what you can do and you can't do, and then so many years later, they disappear, and why was it, you had those covenants in the first place? But is that a legal issue?
Well,
We won't go into that. Anyway, I'd like to see more I don't understand this enough I do know I want safety.
Chris, can I make a recommendation?
Yeah.
So as I understand this map, it looks to me like the orange lines are all based on what we've received related to the Wisconsin Bureau of Aeronautics and FAA aerial photo, that all hangars should be outside of the orange line. And it appears to me that at least at this point, every single hangar that's been built, and it looks like the vast majority are on the south side, are outside that orange line. I would recommend to you that to the extent that you're going to approve this tonight, I would not approve anything within that orange line. Now, to the extent that there may be additional information that we could get and we could have further discussions that would potentially justify putting it inside the orange line, I would not tell you to close the door on that, but tonight, based on the information you had, I would certainly not recommend approving anything within the orange line.
What do we have from the FAA?
Well, I think that you hit it on the head when it's a little bit confusing. So the one thing to me that isn't really confusing are the orange lines, and the fact that these are, whether they're, and one of the issues are how strict are these rules? Are they laws, or are they, guidelines? We need, I would say, at a village staff level, to the extent that you would be interested in approving anything between the orange lines, we need a lot more information on that. I do think that tonight, if you want to, you have the ability to approve the hangar so long as it complies with the setbacks as identified within the orange lines.
I was just going to ask, and none of us were here at the beginning. I've worked on areas that had airports and landing, both commercial and private residential development out west. And there were clear FHA standards and approvals. So my question is this something that has to be certified? Has it historically been certified? Do you need to go to the DOT and make sure it still complies? What are the guidelines by the FHA that are tied to this property, and are they being honored?
The FAA, by talking to them, they told me this is not an instrument runway. It's visual approach only. You have to be able to see the whole runway and land. They don't care about setbacks, as long as you can see the whole
crash
runway.
zones or anything
Now,
like that?
the Wisconsin Bureau, I don't know. Each state is different, so I don't know what Wisconsin. If that's the Wisconsin recommendation, like you say, It is a recommendation, but, I'd be willing to.
And
to
your
stay outside the
insurance
line.
carrier, your risk management doesn't require any kind of documentation that says you're operating within an industry standard.
Well,
I'm just
I
saying
think you
if
got an
there's-
option, you can approve
Sure they will.
outside of the orange line or defer this, we don't have good information to approve anything inside the orange line. So, either defer it, and have the property owners have some further discussion, or approve it with the understanding it has to be outside the orange line.
I just want to clarify, in the middle of the orange lines is 15 feet south of the pavement, the runway? No?
45 feet is what I think.
It's-
it is.
45
So the
or
pavement
65.
is in the middle of the two orange lines? No.
Yes, it is.
No.
In between the two white lines, but it's a little to the north.
Fusion.
The third north, this is the true center line. So,
I'm in the white lines.
you had a vote on this from the, what do you call yourselves, the association? This association of some sort? And it was pretty even across where it was? I mean, was it one way, a long ways, or?
Well, what was the,
'Cause
what was the vote, Karen? We had, I think, 14 members present plus 3. There's a total of how many? 21?
23.
Well, there's 23 shares, but 2 of them are not active. So we had altogether, when it was done, I think we had 16 total votes. 2 people wanted 120 feet. The rest of them, the 14, wanted 65 feet of the 21 member interests. So it was, I guess you could say it was 16 to whatever the 21 is.
You
So-
wanted 50.
Pardon?
You wanted 50.
No, I
So-
changed mine after the discussion to
Yes, everybody was
65.
changing
So-
their mind.
I'm not sure
Well,
what
this is a-
proposal we're actually.
I don't
Yeah, this is
Well, I mean,
a very difficult topic, understanding the difference between the DOT and the FAA. And looking at these maps, we're all kind of sitting there a little perplexed, trying to understand really the dynamics of this. I'm looking at some of these outstructures that are very close to the orange line, and I don't know how those affect the pilots now.
You can land.
My thought right now is to maybe table this and grab some additional information. as
what
we can-
information would we need? I mean, when you say grab some additional information, what information is gonna help us? FAA?
Really on
giving us
FAA,
something, or-
DOT guidelines, I mean, if it hits the FAA and hits the DOT guidelines for airport safety, you know,
So
how can we trump
If I'm right with the orange lines,
those
can we
agencies?
So my comment is to that, Brad, is the FAA has already given you a ruling on what their rules are with this because of the type it is. Now, we should do our due diligence to make sure and verify that, because anybody can say whatever they want in any meeting, and it's not necessarily true.
The orange ones are from the State Department.
So the orange lines,
That's what they
if
sent
we're
us.
good with Brian's recommendation, if it's outside of the orange lines, we can approve.
Yep.
At this point. So that, I think that's what we'd be looking at right now.
That'd be my comfort level.
Or
not knowing
table
all
it.
the details of the
If we
airport.
want to table it, I'm just, if we're gonna table it, what are we tabling it for, to find out?
To verify the FAA and DOT regulations instead of just, I have no documentation saying exactly what it is.
So if I could addendum to that then, and just say we could approve without, outside the orange lines, and have staff look at what FAA to make sure that it meets those guidelines, the ones that are outside the orange lines? Is that fair?
Fair, but then what do we consider the setbacks? Is it a 45 or greater? Is it the 65?
What are the orange lines?
We're confused over here, so.
Object-free, I mean, in here, this was provided, this has been the DOT.
Object-free zone.
Right, so the orange lines,
Orange line defines.
This is an
fits.
object-free zone.
Object-free.
Is 125 for the
Regardless of
south.
what kind of airport it is.
That orange line though is not
So when
anywhere
I
close to the old
understand.
covenants, you know. The old covenants were at like 120, and that orange line is what, 10? Or 20, Lynn?
I'm not,
So if you look, you can, my,
This is the
fence is right at the line of where the old covenants was, so you kinda can't tell from far away, but you see the blue blob from the pool, and then there's the white around it. Pretty much figure where that ends is where the old covenants end. So it's set back considerably much more than that orange line. So, just for frame of reference.
And that's why, as an association, we tried to compromise between that old number and what Steve wants to do, and safety.
So where is the orange line exactly? How many feet?
Lynn, do you remember?
Karen, do you have that?
I thought it was like 10.
So,
At
I'm-
Steve's property, that orange line is 45 feet from his lot.
Inside lot
Into his property.
Into his property.
Well, I can't build within,
So his
Outside.
application at 40, he can't build it. You should
45 I
approve
could.
that. Minimum 45, you go beyond that. And there you can decide that, I guess. Which piece?
We didn't have this picture at his original 40, was the thing.
I'm inclined to table right now with it too, just because I'm not comfortable with the numbers. The map is tough, is making it tough on me and where in relationship we should go. I'm looking at the south side as opposed to the north
Orange lines are
side.
the FAA, which is the total, the parameter around there, covering the 125 feet.
So as a city,
Right,
the
we've
village
heard
authority-
testimony that it's 65 feet, and we've heard other people say it's 45
pulled
feet.
them
That's
up.
where
Right,
they've
that's
got,
what I'm trying to
we
figure
got some
out.
confusion on this end of the table. We're recommending you table this to have some further discussion among the property owners, and then they can provide some more documentation to us that we can actually have verified.
Because, I mean, we're not, I mean, I think what I've heard Kevin say and what I've heard the planning commissioner say, our concern is public safety.
Right.
We're not bound by these covenants, whether no matter whether they're in place or not. Sounds to me like to whatever action you're gonna take, you wanna be able to hang your hat on the fact that whether it's the FAA or the state of Wisconsin, somebody has identified what would be, whether it's official safety area or a quasi-safety area, that's the type of information that you would like to have in order to make your decision on a conditional use permit that is primarily gonna be related to a public safety issue.
So based on them recommending that we table this, do we have a motion for that?
Motion to table.
Motion by
Discussions
Brad
for
Zeman.
revised site plan.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Sue Springman. Okay, do we have any other discussion?
I would like to know how close, like the next closest object is to that runway, if someone can figure it out.
by object.
Well, something that would impede or be a safety issue or anything like that.
Well, Bush is right on the property line.
But bushes can go away, all right?
There's power
Structures
boxes
can't go
right
away.
on the power line.
I think, Chris, you're asking for structures.
But again, I think that's a
North
ruling
side
from the
or south
FAA.
side?
Yeah, we'd be all in favor of the utility company moving those boxes.
The fuel pump is inside the orange line.
Yeah, but there's kind of a horseshoe three-dimensional safety.
Can't have a discussion.
The windsock is
Yep,
way
we've
inside the
got,
orange
we've got it
line.
motioned and second. Okay, I'm gonna take a vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. So, all right, so it's tabled. for this
So just
point.
a quick discussion on this. I would like, a lot of these sites I always want to walk or visualize. This is private property, it's marked private property. You know, if I park my car there, do I have the permission to walk there and visualize it?
Contact Lynn Erickson. He'll
Yeah,
he'll
contact
set up a
Lynn.
tour.
I have blue flags in my yard.
That's big.
That's the 40.
Work with
foot line.
Lynn
I can
Erickson.
move
He'll
back
set
to
you up on it.
45 if you-
All the dogs are friendly.
Okay,
Made it-
moving on. Next, we have public hearing and discuss an action on conditional use permit, Waunakee Pet Wellness Complex, Lot 15, Waunakee Business Park, Phase 2. Kevin?
We've formalized the document, the conditional use permit. Brian's drafted it based on comments that were provided by our planner. And we've discussed this, I think this might be our third or fourth meeting where we've had discussions on this project. There's always been positive feedback. We certainly are in favor of recommending approval, but you gotta go through the formal process of the conditional use public hearing.
Okay. Does anybody want to speak first before the public hearing? Okay, so then I'll open up the public hearing for this item for anybody who'd like to speak to us. Nobody turned in a form, I don't believe. Is that right, Tracy? Okay. Seems like about 2 minutes. Okay, moving on. We're gonna close the public hearing. And any comments from our commissioners? Everything seems fine to me. Neighbors seem fine, everybody, I don't see any reason why not.
Glenn and her team's done their work on this project. Pretty straightforward. Put their time in here at Village Hall, so. I'd like to make a motion to approve.
Okay, we've got a motion by Brad Zeman.
Second.
Second, was that you, Joe? Joe Zitzenberger? Any other comments? Call the question, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you, I hope you enjoyed all the discussion this evening. And I'm so upset right now, because there was a Waunakee Run shirt, and I wanted to ask him what year that was from. It was older. It was older. I know that. And I, well, no, thanks a lot. I don't know how to take that.
Thank you.
All right. Next, we've got our public hearing and discussion action on a request to amend the GDP for Kilkenny Farms Commons to consolidate 82 multi-family units previously approved for lots 263 and 264 to lot 2 of CS 14357.
Just as a big overview, initially on the general development plan, there was multifamily units that were on the lower part, on lot 263, 264, which are on the southern portion of the lot near Waterwheel. What this proposal is to consolidate those number of units on the blue shaded area. And that's the area that's really bordered by Dean Clinics, the daycare center, and then the assisted living. We certainly think it's an appropriate use. We've gone through the initial consultation. I didn't think there was any opposition. That's right, it wasn't properly noticed on our meeting, so we didn't have a discussion last meeting. At the planning commission, we did at the joint planning commission, they thought it was an appropriate place for this 82 units. And I think it was mentioned before, does this affect in terms our 25% rule? And since the zoning is already in place, it does not. They already conform to the rezone requirements with regard to the 25%. So this would be an amendment to the general development plan. It's probably more considered a minor amendment, but we put language in the general development plan that even minor amendments had to go through the full public process, which includes a public hearing, an optional public hearing at our plan commission meeting, an optional plan commission or public hearing at the joint planning commission, and then a required public hearing at the village board level. There were some amendments made to the general development plan to not only the maps, but the text that go along with that. And Tracy, do you have the updated? The updated one.
The text.
What's that?
The text or the
text, yeah. And we had some further discussion, or Ed did today, the planner, with some of their folks that are the developers that are going to be purchasing the property. And we came really to an understanding on what those changes needed to be. And I think we'd like you to walk us through, Ed, if you can.
Sure.
What those proposed changes are. And I can prompt them up for you. The first one is with regard to the requirement on the gross square footage on not exceeding 133,138 square feet. And if you can just go through one at a time.
So first of all, the first GDP that we approved goes back to February 2013. It was a while ago. And the intent of a GDP, and this is also a PUD, is to allow for market forces, and as the development parcels come into play, that you have the ability to move them. And so the purpose of the chart, the summary chart, is that the bottom line doesn't change, but the chess pieces are allowed to move. So the development as it went forward, and so we had the 82 units approved down in the corner of lot 265, 266, in the bottom left corner of the graphic. So that use in the written and in the graphic, that use has been removed from those parcels and that use has been transferred to that upper area where you see the H's. I'm sorry, the K's. So the two Ks represent the same amount of multifamily housing units that were proposed in the lower left corner. So those two lots where we talked about the Mefford site, we talked about where the Waunakee Community Bank, Anamark, previously, 5 years ago, those two sites had that land use listed as a possible development. So that has been taken out of those parcels per Mike Lawton's written amendment. It is now allowed those uses to occur in the upper northeastern in those two units. So the one concern that the housing developer had was that he was trying to understand the numbers both from a square footage and a parking. And what we explained, and so the total of Zone 5 allows up to 133,000 in the previous chart, and it still allowed here. So his concern, or their concern, was, well, between the daycare center, the independent living, can I build my footprint, which is shy of 50,000. So if you add all the footprints together, there's still another 50,000 that can be built in Zone 5. So that was conveyed, and the developer was comfortable with that. So if you look at the smaller building footprints to the left of the detention pond there, and you look at Building B is about 45,000 square foot. So you could see just graphically that there's more than adequate square footage to complete Zone 5. The parking is an aggregate, and when you look through all these parking, it shows a density and dispersion of parking. So in this zone, it calls out for 4 something, which is typical of retail and commercial office use. Their submittal complies with the code, complies with our code, and actually it exceeds it slightly of 2 parking spaces per unit. So obviously, they're not going to build 4.27 or whatever it states here. And they were concerned that we're going to hold them to 4 per thousand. So they are building to code standards. The 4.27 is just a holding pattern for that whole zone. And as you can see, if you compare these numbers to the original, the parking numbers are actually going down as the development goes in. So they can build, they can accommodate their parking, they can accommodate the square footage. And lastly, there are some clarifications as to the reference of buildings above 20,000 square feet. They wanted to make sure that it was clearly identified that those buildings are commercial buildings and, again, comply with the code. 45 and above, you get into conditional use and the upper limit. And again, they wanted the specificity that it deals with commercial properties and not a multifamily residential property. So we clarified all that. The charts support that. And I think there were some footnotes that also needed clarifying. Just for general information, we had referred the older code references, section references based on the old code. Those have been updated. There are a couple of uses that have been eliminated. Those have been eliminated. So for example, J, that was deleted. It had a previous reference which no longer applies. So it was kind of an administrative cleanup with the concern that the proposed multifamily housing is possible within the summation of square footages, parking. They meet setbacks, they meet parking both in and out of the structure, and they still are subject to an SIP once this gets approved. So we're not over the finish line yet, but in terms of the use and the zone, I think everybody's comfortable. I know I threw a lot at you. Hopefully it was understandable.
I hope it was understandable to everybody else. 'Cause
Yeah,
I'm
to
gonna open up
everybody
the public
else.
hearing.
Yeah. So again,
Are you done with that?
yes, I am finished.
Okay, then I'll open up the public hearings. Anybody want to address us on this item this evening? Mike Lott.
Did I forget something?
No, Ed did a great job. Mike Lawton representing Kilkenny Farms. I'm here with Jared Tierney. If you have any questions, we're happy to answer them. We also have Dan Seeley here, who's from our apartment developer, Steve Brown Apartments, and he's happy to answer any questions. As Ed just indicated, you'll see this all again in much more detail when their SIP is filed. This is just a preliminary thing to get the units on the right parcel. We're not increasing the number of housing units. We still have to go through the usual approval process. And we are eliminating, I don't know, Ed, if you mentioned, but there won't be any retail in this block along Simon Crest Way. It's going to be the multifamily, and we deleted the retail uses from that particular parcel. So anyway.
And the parking.
And the parking, right, yeah. So we're happy to answer any questions that you might have on this, but we're really looking forward to Steve Brown coming in with their SIP, which will be happening fairly soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else that would like to address us? Okay, then I'm going to close the public hearing. I just have one question. From a traffic pattern perspective in that area, are we good?
And actually, with the residential use, we will, in theory, reduce some of the traffic because it's not commercial retail. So the impacts will actually be less.
Okay. With that, that's my only question.
Brian would like one clarification that we want to add as well to the.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what Ed's been talking about and is the grid, and I think what we just want to have the flexibility to work with Mr. Lawton and the applicants on, there's language in the text of the amendment to the GDP. First of all, I think we'd want to add a fourth paragraph to what's, and right now I'm looking at page 54 of 92, and this is the amendment to the GDP that Mike prepared. I think we just want to add a fourth paragraph to acknowledge the fact that we have modified this grid within the map, which I agree with everything that Ed said. In other words, especially when we talk about the locations of the building on the map, we knew back when it was approved in 2013 that things would move around a little bit and that the table would be adjusted. But we do have a specific reference to the table within the GDP itself. So I think we'll want to add a paragraph there that just says, you know, the Exhibit A has been modified pursuant to the attached. And I do want to have a discussion with there's language in paragraph 2B right now that says there shall be no numerical limit on the number of square feet in any residential building on Lot 2. And I haven't had a chance to talk with Ed yet in light of all of the discussions that have occurred over today and Friday to determine, based on what's now in the grid, whether or not that sentence is appropriate, or, you know, I don't want to put any type of over-regulation in there. I just need to have that discussion with them.
Fair.
Okay, other questions or comments? Susan?
I'd just say, I think actually this is a much better location for multifamily, and combining two small buildings makes absolutely no sense in multifamily from a management standpoint. For underground parking and all of that, I think this is much better, and it's closer to the residential versus out kind of isolated, which I didn't think was as ideal, so I would, you know, I look forward to seeing the final design. I know that the developer is a very high-quality developer. People might want to look at their website and see the quality of the structures that they've done, and their long-term owners and managers are not come in, I believe,
Flippers.
which is important for multifamily.
And Sue, I feel the same way, same sentiments. As this was put together, I remember looking at this originally, and the comment said it was like a chessboard, moving things around a little bit. I think these adjustments are really positive, keeping us closer to Peaceful Valley Parkway, on that commercial to really develop on the lower portion.
So Brian, are you saying with the recommended motion, approval of a GDP amendment to the JPC and Village Board?
It would be
to
a recommendation.
include the paragraph you're stating?
Well,
or-
it would be more than that, Chris. It'd be to include the paragraph that, clarification that Brian provided, as well as the 4 clarifications that Ed went through. So what you're doing is you're directing staff to finalize the document consistent with those comments, and you're recommending approval with those changes to the Joint Planning Commission and to the Village Board. So the recommended motion would be to recommend approval to the Joint Planning Commission and Village Board as modified and explained tonight at the Planning Commission.
So moved.
Okay, that motion's been made by Susan Springman. Is that detailed enough?
I think we're taped, and I think Kevin walked through the explanation
Okay.
well enough that I think so,
Okay,
yes.
so we have a motion by Susan Springman, second by Chris Thomas. Any other comments? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it.
Have an extra copy of this.
Next, we have, is there a reason we did the downtown parking study before the next public hearing?
No, I don't know. I don't know how to get
Can we
it.
reverse, can I change
I
that order?
don't think that would take very long, the downtown parking.
All right, well, okay. Next, we've got consideration of downtown parking study.
What we're proposing is to do really an inventory of our downtown parking. Todd and I here, we had a gentleman that's in the back sitting by Todd, and I'll let him introduce himself. He's a graduate of the UW Master's Program in Planning, and he came to us and wanted to work with us on a particular project. And Todd suggested the parking, which has been really a hot topic in our downtown area, and really to get a good inventory of what our existing parking is and what the occupancy of those parking needs are. We did have some comments from Ann Lundowski, and she mailed me and copied Sue and said, you know, this proposal says we're looking at 10 in the morning and 2 during the week. That's probably not what we're shooting for. But we want to know what's going on the weekends. That's probably when we're going to see some of our parking problems in the downtown area. This is not a consultant proposal. This is a graduate, a student that graduated that would be working on an hourly basis. We typically pay just to give you a sense, we typically pay our interns about $14 an hour, get paid at that intern rate. I mean, he's looking for a real job, so I don't know how long we're gonna be able to keep him, but we certainly want to keep him and get him going as quick as we can, especially at that cost savings compared to what a consultant would charge him for that type of study. He completed a similar study for the city of Janesville, so I think he's got the good background and experience to at least take the first crack at this. So just a quick introduction would be helpful.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Zhong Lenshi, and I'm from Taiwan. And I graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison this May and got a master's degree in urban regional planning. So I worked with the city of Janesville and conducted their biennial downtown parking study last summer. So the study basically just did inventory study and do the occupancy study about downtown parking. So that's kind of study we're discussing for the village. Really appreciate this opportunity to work with the village.
Thank you. So, what?
The funding's, I just want to, certainly it can be an informal consensus by the planning commission to proceed with this. I just wanted to give you a heads up, we're going to be taking this on. We have money within our planning budget to tackle the cost for this project. So as long as there wasn't any objection, we were planning on proceeding with this. I think if it's okay, and if I can get, heads nodding in the right direction, there's consensus to move forward with this.
We need this data to do any more comprehensive of a study anyway, so we need to get this base information.
Kevin, what would it cost us if we used a consultant for this?
Probably in the neighborhood of, I'm really guessing here, Ed might have a better idea, but it's gonna be well north of $25,000.
I say 25 to 50.
25 to 50.
Okay. And so, do we have a cap on this, what we're putting for potential spending?
No, we'll just take it out of our intern planning budget, but he's got an estimate, a number of hours. I think he had, a maximum of 260 hours was the estimate. I don't know if we'll get to that point, but that's the max that he had put into it.
Okay.
The funding is not something I don't think the planning commission would generally, decide. That's usually deferred, to administrative or the board level. I just want to make there's consensus on moving forward with this type of planning document.
Yeah, I'm good.
Do we have to make a motion or just consensus?
I think we have consensus unless you hear objection.
Do we have any objection?
My only concern would be kind of similar to what Ann had sent in. We probably want to look a little more, if we're gathering the data, it's probably worth looking at some other
10 and 2 is not that important to us. Really,
Yeah.
the night and weekends is what's important to us.
Yep.
This is great timing with the conjunction of the housing study, so it might help us as well. So.
Yep.
Okay, so everybody's good? Moving forward? Okay. Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, next we have public hearing and discuss an action on proposed zoning changes related to building height standards, lot area standards, and setbacks for more restrictive districts. Brian, are you starting?
So within your packet right now, you have pages 63 through 69. That's a red line version of the current zoning code, and Chris had requested this at the last Plan Commission meeting. This is for information purposes only. It kind of helps you visualize, I think, the changes that we're suggesting. The ordinance that village staff is recommending approval on is pages 70 through 73 of your packet. I've been asked to kind of, and back for the August meeting, Jason Valerius had put together a memo that we had discussed briefly, and then I've been asked to kind of walk through a little bit more of an explanation as to why we're doing this. And the other thing I would note, so Tracy's got a presentation that I've put together. It's not very long, but I do read the Waunakee Tribune all the time, and I did see that there were a number of comments in the letters to the editor, and so I wanted to walk through some of those comments on each of our changes, because I would tell you that I think the vast majority of the comments were in fact inaccurate, and so one of the things that I wanted to let you know as Plan Commission members are, what do we have now and what are the changes that we're proposing? So the first, when you look at the ordinance, we got 10 separate paragraphs. The first 8 paragraphs all relate to proposed changes regarding height restrictions. And so we're dealing with 5 different zoning districts, R5, O3, C1, I1, I2. In our current zoning code right now, buildings within all of those districts, in C1 it's office buildings, buildings in all of those districts by conditional use permit can exceed 45 feet in height. And there is no cap. In other words, you could right now, under the current village code, approve a building, for example, that's 65 feet high in the R5 multifamily residential district. We ran across this when we were working on the Hovde project, and it is relatively, I've said this before, it's relatively standard that when you don't search for ways to change your code necessarily. You run across concerns that you may have when you're looking at projects. One of the issues that we ran across when we were looking at the Hovde project is around the same time, the state modified the state statutes as they pertain to conditional use permits. And if you scroll down a little bit, Tracy, why here also the purpose is to identify standards for the zoning code. And one of the things that we identify within these changes is in fact, we put a cap at 55 feet in height. That cap is not in the current zoning code. The reason why we want to do this is, I'm generalizing here, but the change in the state statutes basically said, when you apply conditions as part of the conditional use permit process, you want to have objective standards. To the extent that the standards are not objective or measurable, that allows an applicant to potentially challenge the conditions that you place on a conditional use permit. And really where this came from is in northern part of the state, there was I think it was a frac sand mining project where there was, I think, at least 50 conditions that were placed on a conditional use permit. And the applicant felt that those were unreasonable. And so they went to the legislature, and the legislature changed the law. So one of the things that we talked about at the staff level is, how do we start working in more objective standards into our conditional use permit process? In light of the work that we were doing on the Hovde project, one of the areas that we identified was height. And so if you go to the page 63 of your packet, that is where, so for example, this is the R5 zoning district. We're crossing out the language that says buildings over 45 feet in height. Again, right now, under the current code, you can have buildings over 45 feet in height as conditional uses. What we've said is, let's try to put some standards in there if we're going to address buildings over 45 feet in height. These are fairly objective, we felt. The standards A, B, C, and D, as you look in your packet, those are the same standards that are in the C1D zoning district that we applied to Hovde. If you want to, so when I was looking at the Tribune and I saw some of the comments, and I have some of them identified in the, can you scroll up, I'm sorry. Here are some of the, well, so this is just language that's in the state statute, and I bold-faced it, any condition imposed must be related to the purpose of the ordinance and based on substantial evidence. Then the definition of substantial evidence is in the statutes there. And then there's also language in the law that says the requirements and conditions must be reasonable and to the extent practicable, measurable. That's our goal with these changes, is to try to identify some reasonable and measurable standards within our code that do not exist today. Because we wanted to avoid a situation where somebody came in and said, hey, I want to put, for example, a 65-foot building in the R5 district. It's allowed under our current zoning code, but we don't have standards that would necessarily address that. And by not having objective standards, you're potentially opening the door to some type of lawsuit if you, for example, were to deny a building that high. When I saw some of the comments in the Tribune, and here they're bulleted, the first proposed change in building heights, well, it's not really a change. Buildings could be constructed up to 55 feet tall on these districts. They can already be constructed up to 55 feet tall under our current zoning code. We're looking to place limitations on how high buildings can go. This change, for example, would allow 55-foot multifamily buildings to be constructed in Woodland Crest High-V development. Again, we're looking to place restrictions on how high buildings can be. Right now, these restrictions don't exist, and this really is not a change. The maximum building height in Sun Prairie for all zoning districts except office is 40 feet. That's not true. If you scroll down a little bit, Tracy, in fact, they have language in the Sun Prairie zoning code that allows buildings to exceed those height by conditional use permit. Now, I didn't look so closely at the Sun Prairie code to see if they've changed it to identify objective standards, but in fact, those buildings can be taller than 40 feet based on the conditional use permit. And then some of the other bullet points, again, refer to changes. And I guess I just wanted for the Plan Commission members and for the public to know these are not changes. These buildings can already be higher than 45 feet within our current zoning code by a conditional use permit. What we're trying to do here is identify objective standards that relate to buildings that are over 45 feet. And in fact, we are capping them at 55 feet. So I would say that we're putting in place regulations that are stricter than what we have right now. So that again, when you look at paragraphs 1 through 8 of our proposed changes, all of those relate to the height restrictions. The next section is just, if you skip ahead within your packet to page 68 of 92. So we have currently in the zoning code, we have language that talks about, it's called lot area, it's just titled lot area. As we worked through this, we thought the better title for it is dwelling unit density. Now, this language is only in the C1D zoning district and only applies to the C1D zoning district. And really the purpose for this change, and this is something that Jason noted in his August 3rd memo, is to incorporate into the code reasonable practice that acknowledges the spatial challenges of redevelopment in the downtown area. I haven't necessarily heard this so much in Waunakee, but certainly in Dane County, you always hear about this idea of you want to, as much as possible, avoid urban sprawl. Well, one way to avoid urban sprawl is to have downtown redevelopment. We had some language in the code that we had some concerns of, depending on how you interpreted it, it could really kind of hurt downtown redevelopment. So what we've proposed is some language here, and we did apply this as part of the Hovde project that said, look, if you have certain requirements, if you can't fit them specifically on the parcel where you're building, if you have an adjacent parcel that you can utilize to satisfy those standards, we're going to allow you to use those adjacent parcels. Here, and I would say that right now in the village zoning code, we already allow off-lot parking. That's already permitted. It's in section 133-995. I would acknowledge that it's a little, the language needs work. And I think as part of this downtown parking study, eventually when we, kind of get the information that we need, we're probably going to take a crack at changing some of this language, because there's certain spots where it would allow parking 500 feet away. There's other spots where it would allow parking 200 feet away, and then obviously in between. The other thing that I would mention is currently in the village zoning code, the Plan Commission already has the ability to authorize exceptions to the parking standards. So it would already, the Plan Commission right now, when it comes to this parking standards, would already have a lot of flexibility when it comes to parking. Here, what we're proposing to do is we're basically taking an administrative opinion that Kevin issued related to the Hovde property. We're working it into our ordinances. It's the ordinance draft that we have is a little bit more narrow based on some discussions that we've had at the Plan Commission level. We also took into consideration some comments that were made during the public hearing process. Specifically, I know some people made comments during the public hearing process, or public hearing is the wrong word, public meeting, because we held some public meetings about, we got to make sure that there's a nexus. In other words, if I want to have parking, if my project is located here, and then I want to have off-lot parking or stormwater, like we have with Hovde, across the cross-street extension is going to be the stormwater that's going to serve them, there has to be this nexus between the two. I mean, and I think that we have that within the code provision. It talks about, if you're going to have parcels that are off-site, and which parcels or parcels contain improvements necessary for the development of the parent parcel paid for by the owner of the parent parcel. There have to be necessary. There has to be a tie-in. And quite frankly, we already have language in our village code right now in Chapter 109, Article 3, that deals with stormwater. When we view projects in the downtown, whether this particular code provision would be applicable or not, or we view other projects within the village, we always have to apply our stormwater ordinances. So anything that any recommendations that you make tonight, or anything that the village board may do a week from now, doesn't change anything related to the existing stormwater provisions that we already have in our code. And then my last paragraph there is just to note that, again, once we're done with that parking study, I do think that we're going to have to go back and take a look at that section right now, because we do need a little bit more clarity on 250 feet, 400, 500 feet, exactly what would apply and when. But we did have some comments in the Waunakee Tribune that, again, do not believe were really accurate as it applied to this proposed change. Lot area would include parcels within 500 feet of apartment buildings for improvements such as parking and stormwater, regardless of its location in Waunakee. Well, first of all, this only deals with C1D. It doesn't deal with other areas of the village. And the second thing is, if we do have a proposal within the C1D zoning district, and the property owner / developer is requesting to have off-site parking or off-site stormwater, they are going to have to be able to demonstrate that where they're putting the off-site stormwater is actually going to be serving the development that they're proposing. That's part of the ordinance change that we're suggesting. It's also going to be part of our analysis under our stormwater ordinance. This would allow Madison and Main to have their parking across Main Street. Madison and Main has already received its parking approval, so what we're doing tonight is not going to affect the Madison and Main developments. Stormwater management would be allowed to be separate from the impermeable surface it is intended to mitigate. That's not true, like I just said. In fact, there needs to be the nexus between what your project is and where your stormwater is going to be located. You're going to have to be able to demonstrate to us under this code provision and under our stormwater ordinance that there is, in fact, that they're working together. The proposed change to ordinance that allows parking 500 feet away would apply equally. Again, here I want to have a clarification. The ordinance change that we're having here does not apply equally across the village. It only applies in the C1D zoning district. There is currently language in our code that talks about off-site parking. Part of that parking does have a 500-foot limit. There's other parts that I've already said have somewhere around 250 feet and anything in between. That's something that we're going to have to work through later, but we're not proposing a change tonight with this language. And so I think I've already kind of covered, my responses as I was walking through this. If you could scroll down to probably the last page. So the last change relates to, this is on page 69 of 92 of your packet. So when you look at page 69, we currently have in our code this language that is in subsection D that deals with setbacks. And what happens if you have a lot that is abutting a more restrictive district? How do we handle setbacks? What we're suggesting to do here with this language is add a similar provision related to height. That language is not in the code right now. But, excuse me, by proposing this language, we are actually making the code more restrictive because we would be introducing a concept that is not in the code right now. And one of the reasons why we've, walked down this path was when we were, I think we were looking at the Hovde project, one of the village board members, I think it was Dr. Ranum, mentioned, how does it relate? How does the height of one building for a new development relate to other zoning districts if it abuts a zoning district? We knew that we already had this setback language in here. So, and Jason really deserves the credit here on this subsection too. He's the one that came up with the proposed language. But I think that the point that I wanted to make clear was, and again, in his memo, one of the purposes to address building height transitions in situations where a new building could be taller than a building in an adjacent district with stricter height limits. I agree with his conclusion there. We had some language within the Tribune in the letters to the editor that's saying that we're weakening current language, and I just want to let you, the plan commissioners, know we aren't weakening anything. In fact, we're strengthening something. We're introducing essentially a regulation that does not exist right now. And so I'm certainly willing to answer any questions that you have regarding the changes, and obviously we have a lot of information within the packet, but I did want to give a little bit of an outline as to what we're doing, why we're doing it, and why I believe, and I do think it makes sense, and I do think that what we're doing, some of the comments that were made in the Tribune were not in fact accurate, and I think it was important to point that out.
Okay, so is it appropriate for me to open the public hearing now?
There was one other thing that I wanted to comment on. There was a statement made in one of these letters to the editor that said, most of these changes are for ordinances that the village violated when approving Hovde. And I want to make sure abundantly clear to everybody at the village that we did not violate any ordinances when we approved Hovde. It's been well documented that there were certain notices that we may have missed on one or two occasions, and we had to go back and redo things. But we definitely did not violate any ordinances. And quite frankly, when we talk about the ordinances that we're changing tonight, none of these height restrictions have any impact on the C1D zoning district. The language that we're proposing regarding height restrictions for abutting zoning districts didn't even exist. And the only code provision that we're dealing with that did deal with C1D, we looked at it. I know we had comments. Kevin issued an opinion, an interpretation as the zoning administrator that I fully support personally. And so I just wanted to make clear to you all that there was no violations whatsoever.
Okay. All right. So we're going to open up the public hearing. First, I've got Mary Heimbecker. I think she left. So she asked me to read this. Please read if after 6:45. She's at 306 West 3rd Street. Plan Commission meeting, public hearing comments. Public hearing and discussion action on proposed zoning changes related to building height standards, lot area standards, and setbacks from more restrictive districts. Why is 55 feet across the board height for all the districts being made? It doesn't make any sense. A 55-foot R4 probably won't feel much different than a 55 R5 building, and the builder probably won't make the units much smaller. So it is just a way to increase level use levels, rather than looking at the intent of the districts and making a more appropriate and nuanced recommendation based on the intent and purpose of the districts. It would seem better to me that 55 feet be allowed in the industrial park for industrial buildings, but set the feet to 45 feet in the downtown district to keep with the current building looks and feel of our Main Street. Can you please explain why you are suggesting a 55-foot height instead of number of stories allowed? For example, if you set the ordinance at 55 feet, someone could come in and say, yes, we can do that, but then still build a 5-story building if they put in all, say, 8-foot ceilings. Even at 11 feet between stories, a 55-foot height building means 5.5 stories. Averaging across the 5.5 stories, you still easily have a full 15 feet in the first floor height to meet the code requirements for commercial spaces identified for by the comprehensive plan, and a 10-foot for each successive floor. Okay. Next, we have Bruce and Julie Kaufman, 908 Turnberry Drive. Written comment: I oppose the ordinance changes. We want to retain our small town feel and individuality. Thank you. Then we have Gary Lee, 907 Turnberry Drive opposes the ordinance change. Sam Kaufman, 908 Turnberry Drive, ordinance changes, opposes. I oppose the ordinance changes. I don't want an urban downtown with tall buildings. We have different zoning districts for different uses, so the height should vary between them. Main Street has a traffic grade already, a D traffic grade already, so we don't need dense development downtown. My neighbors live adjacent to a different zoning district and do not want taller buildings behind their homes. 262 people signed a petition against the height increase for Hovde in only 2.5 days. Please vote no on behalf of every citizen, young and old, in Waunakee. Thank you. I think it's AJ or Al, and it's B here.
It's AJ, I know him. It's AJ.
AJ, okay. 816 Meadowbrook Lane, ordinance changes, opposes. Connor Schwen, 1716 Daily Drive, opposes the ordinance changes. Then we have Linda Ashmore, would like to present. She's opposing and would like to speak. And she asked, did I turn these out?
Yes, please.
2, 3, 4, there you go. Sue?
So what I'm having Chris hand out is something from the January 29th Plan Commission meeting, and the same language appeared in the February 5th Village Board meeting, where the TID 8 plan was being presented, and what on section 14 is the part that I'm really focusing on. The proposed changes in the master plan, map, building codes, and Village of Waunakee ordinances. It is expected that this plan will be complementary to the village's master plan. There are no proposed changes to the master plan, map, building codes, or other village ordinances for the implementation of this plan. So right away after this happened, Hovde came in and said, we want 55 feet, we need the setback. So right away there was an ordinance change that went through. Now we're looking at, I understand what you're saying, that, oh, well, maybe there wasn't a cap before, but people would look at it before and say, this section is 45 feet, and they didn't really think about the conditional use permit, to my understanding. So instead of saying, well, let's limit it, why don't we just take the conditional use permit out? It's 45 feet. Downtown was supposed to be 45 feet because it was a historic district. People were really upset when that changed to go to 55 feet along the conditional use permit. So I'm saying go the other way and say, don't allow conditional use permits. You have a set height for a district, and that's what the height is. Because then if you're a homeowner or you're somebody that's in that district, you know what you're getting. So, and some of the things that were presented as being false in the letters to the editor, one of the ones about the abutting a district, the more restricted district. This is from Jason's August 3rd memo. The proposed change would take a similar approach with the building height, requiring that the maximum height will match that of the adjacent more restricted district, but then allow additional height up to the normal maximum is set back further than the minimum building setback line. So it is allowing additional height. You know, the thing saying it doesn't, this is from his memo. So I have a problem with that. You know, as we say, we're seeing problems here, you're seeing issues, and it's, no, there's not an issue. And you can kind of pick and choose your things that you want to look at. So yeah, I would like to see set limits in each zoning district. I don't see any reason to go 55 feet across each district. The off-lot parking is a big issue for downtown because there isn't enough parking already downtown. And I think the letter to the editor that addressed that this could affect other districts. When you do something, you set a precedent. So if you do it in the C1D district, it's very easy to say, well, we already did it there, maybe we want to do it over here too, because it's hard to develop. And my issue comes back to traffic. I mean, I live a block off of Main Street. It's really, really hard to make a left turn onto Main Street. You just don't. You turn right. Or a lot of us will go through the roundabout. There's extra traffic in the roundabout because if you want to go the opposite way, going left, you just go out and take a right to get to the roundabout and come out the way you want to go. So as you look at these things that allow for more dense development, and that was what the the intro was kind of about, well, we have to do an infill. You're harming the existing neighborhood. So, thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you. Then we have Jerry Ashmore, 114 South Street, proposes.
Yes, I'm opposed to the changes to the ordinance, in particular to the one regarding the unit density requirement. To say that no ordinances were violated, I think is arguable. The ordinance says that the lot has to have 1,200 square feet of area per unit, the lot, and elsewhere in the ordinances, a lot is defined as a parcel. A lot is a parcel is a lot. Now we're saying a lot is more than just a parcel. It can include this and that. When I read that long convoluted proposed change to that ordinance, I looked at that and I said, the only way you can make this more obvious that it was written specifically for Hubby is to put their name in it. To the extent that you're changing an ordinance for one particular developer and one particular project, that's bad governing. To the extent that you might argue this is available for any other person to do other projects, I would suggest that anything that you can't do under the honest reason way of interpreting that ordinance as it is now, that would be allowed with the new changes, is something that would be too big and inappropriate for downtown. The Plan Commission and then the Village Board denied T-Wall's project to build a great big project between Main and 2nd Street. And most of the arguments that were made against that project would be equally applicable to anything that would be not allowed by a regular reading of that density ordinance and would be allowed with the changes that are being proposed here. So I would suggest that it's a very bad idea to make the changes to that particular ordinance and to go to an honest reading of the way that's written, that a lot is a parcel and a parcel is a lot. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Carrie Arneson would like to speak. She opposes the ordinance.
So I just want to make a few specific comments about the density ordinance change. So one thing Brian already pointed out is I believe that the proposed language is inconsistent with the current ordinance for off-lot parking in C1D in the section 133-995-13. However, I have a few extra comments. That ordinance requires that off-lot parking facilities should be in the same possession as those of the principal lot. Such possession should be by deed, which is different than the ordinance changes you're seeing. And parking spaces should be within 250 feet of the principal entrance, furthest portions within 400 feet. Hubby didn't meet that. And to me, it's unclear how the proposed change you're seeing is going to fit in or be consistent with the other language that is already in the ordinances. In principle, to me, it seems really inappropriate to allow developers to claim land that's not in their possession by deed, or perhaps is by deed, but maybe a block and a half away, in order to achieve greater density. That calculation to me really feels artificial, and it gives preferential treatment to developers. I can't imagine that a general taxpayer would be allowed to do the equivalent. For example, would a resident be allowed to enter into an agreement to use public parking to service customers in their in-home salon, in their daycare, and then use that to justify putting an addition on their house in order to maximize their profits? Of course not, that's ridiculous. So, and finally, I find it particularly concerning if the off-lot facilities are land that's perhaps village-owned or is otherwise tax exempt. I am sincerely concerned that we might be putting the village at risk of a lawsuit. Under the Uniformity Clause, our state's constitution prohibits local officials from granting preferential tax treatment to influential property owners that will result in unequal taxation. If developers are allowed to artificially, what I believe is artificially expand lot area with village-owned land, the developers being allowed to achieve higher density while being protected from being taxed accordingly on that land being used in that calculation. I've mentioned this a few times before to the staff, and I'm just really hoping to hear a discussion about that tonight that alleviates my fears of a lawsuit. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Dave Prohaska, 205 or 305? 705? Address 705? 705 West Main Street. opposes and would like to speak?
Dave Berhaska, 705 West Main Street. I'm the last house going out of town on the right-hand side next to the veterinary clinic. And in April of this year, there was an offer to buy that property, and I don't know if the offer is still standing or not, to put a 4-story, 45-foot tall building on that piece of property, 72-unit apartment complex. And my concern is that whether or not that offer is still standing or not, to take in consideration that I'm a 1-story house right next to that building. And if that offer doesn't go through, maybe an apartment or an office building gets put on that lot, 55 feet tall, 65 feet tall, like you said, could possibly happen depending on what zoning thing changes. So my concern is that hopefully that you would take into consideration neighboring properties when you're thinking about height restrictions and things like that on these buildings. I'm not going to see the sun if that project gets built. And if there's a different project that goes in there 55 feet tall, I'm not going to see the sun until 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So that's my only thing. So thank you.
That's all the sheets I have. Was there anybody else? I didn't get.
I also signed a sheet, but I got here late, so that was probably my fault.
Okay.
I'm Annie Waunakee, and I live at 103 West 3rd Street. I have 2 issues. The off-lot parking, my understanding is it could be a block away from the potential development. And I get worried that in a small downtown, we're not going to engineer for success, which in my definition would be the easiest decision is the quickest decision, which is the one that you see. So you see your building entrance, you see the parking there, the decision to go in that parking structure is really easy. But if you start separating that building entrance from the parking structure, that decision to park near the building structure is still there, and that entrance is still there, that compulsion to park as close as possible. So you're going to then clog up the surrounding area with cars parked overnight or with competing purposes for retail. So if we're starting a parking study and a housing study, I am having difficulty understanding why we need to make this change right now. So I would just ask you to wait. And if we have more information later on, that would be really great and it would be very helpful. In regards to the setbacks, I don't find setbacks to be a very good mitigator for height. And I sort of looked around the village and I said, gosh, this doesn't really feel right. The Village Crossing is a great development. Cottages on Main, also a great development. Those 2 things actually have something in common, which is a stepped roof line. And they're actually about 25% of those, and they're oriented towards the lower buildings. And so to me, if we're looking to create a scenario where there's a very easy and applicable standard, it would make sense to take the more restrictive height and apply that to the percentage of land that's surrounded by that more restrictive district. So if you have a building that's surrounded by 25% of a lower use district, you have that first step at that lower use, that maximum height, for 25% of the building height. And then you can go up to that maximum 55%, rather than letting it shoot up irrespective of what's surrounding it. So that's what I would really prefer to see as a solution, rather than just messing with the setbacks. Thank you. Oh, one final comment. When you get into the setback issue, you're making the issues surrounding parking and access and stormwater even worse, because I have a 200-foot long lot, and 40 feet, which is the 20-foot setback, and then the additional 20 feet to get up to 55, that detracts 20% of the entire lot. And so if we're talking about small lot areas creating problems for development, I don't actually see this being an attractive solution to them either. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, anybody else that wanted to speak that didn't get a form in? Okay, then I'll close the public hearing. Do you want to comment on it?
Well, there's 3 things that I wanted to comment on. First, I do view the proposed project that Main Street Waunakee LLC that was rejected by the Plan Commission and the Village Board, and that was the Terrence Wall property. I do view that as different from the Hovde project for a number of reasons that were discussed at those meetings and then in statements that I made. But I think it's important to note that those are two distinguishable projects. Obviously, one was approved and one was denied. And in part, where they're located is one, and the zoning districts that they're in are two things that set them aside. Also, the fact that one was inconsistent with the comprehensive plan, as Jason had laid out in his memo, and the Plan Commission and the Village Board adopted, versus the other one was consistent with the comprehensive plan. To address the question regarding the height restriction ordinance and Jason's memo. So again, to be clear, what the new language says is in section 2A, the maximum height of building located in the less restrictive zoning district shall be no greater than the maximum height in the more restrictive district, okay? And then in B, it talks about, okay, here's ways that the building can be a little bit taller. But that's what Jason was commenting on his memo. In other words, if you have two zoning districts that are abutting each other, and one allows a 30-foot high building and the other one allows 45 feet, then you start at the 35 feet for the less restrictive zoning district, and then you do have the ability to go back up to 45 feet based on the language that Jason had drafted in B. So that was the comment regarding allowing the height to go more. It's allowing it to go back to the height that it initially was in the zoning district.
I think that directly answers your question. Is it David? And Victoria owned the property. I looked it up. Your zone residential. The property next to you is zone commercial. If this ordinance is passed, it would put restrictions on the height that it could be right up next to your property, that right adjacent to your property, you'd have to copy the same zoning height restrictions that's in residential.
All right.
And then the last comments I wanted to make is on the tax issue. You know, the language that we're proposing on page 68 of your packet doesn't talk about anything, and I'm going to talk about Hovde in a second, but it doesn't talk about anything related to village-owned land being utilized. The distinction with Hovde is helping to pay for that parking lot, and it is still going to be a public parking lot. That is not going to be a Hovde parking lot. It's a public parking lot, notwithstanding the fact that they're helping to pay for it. And so that was the justification for utilizing that land as part of the analysis, and because they're only paying 50% of it, they only got 50% of it. So could there be some type of, I would say that nothing the village has done to date, and nothing within this ordinance, I would say, increases the likelihood of a parking lot. If all of a sudden we start granting, if we don't have a reasonable justification for it to give somebody our land, and here's the example I would give you. We have a development agreement with Madison and Maine. We gave them that land for $1. But we gave them that land because they gave us guarantees in the agreement that they would increase the property tax base. So over the period of time, we would ultimately get paid back for land that we owned that wasn't on the tax base and was not being developed. So the true test is what the village doing serving a public purpose? Our agreement with Madison, Maine serves a public purpose, notwithstanding the fact that as part of that development agreement, we sold them the land for $1. And so I mean, is it conceivable that there could be tax arguments out there depending on what a municipality does? Yes. I'm not concerned with anything that the village has done to date on that. And there's nothing within the proposed language that gets at the issue of you know, if you're going to use off-street parking or off-lot parking that has and binds the village in any way, shape, or form. All we're saying here is if we're going to approve this, we need to see that there's an agreement in place so that all of a sudden that right to put if you're developer A and all of a sudden on parcel B that you don't own and somebody else owns and they're willing to allow you to utilize it because you're going to pay them some form of rent for their parking, we need to be a party to that agreement to make sure that that parking continues in the future, and we also need that agreement to be recorded to make sure that that agreement continues in the future, or else we wouldn't consider that type of an approval.
Add just a couple other comments. The first one is that this doesn't have any impact on the downtown height for the Hovde project. That was settled months ago. What you're doing tonight or recommending to do tonight. has been resolved in the C1D. This is just putting further restrictions on other areas within the village. I get that one. And the other one, I think you heard the argument about the lot area coverage. And I think it comes down from a policy decision. If you think that what we did with the Hubdy project was a reasonable policy decision, as an example, they use a lot across the street from Cross Street extension for stormwater purposes. Before the lot was even extended, they were prior to that, they were one lot. Or they could have been combined into one lot. Is it reasonable to allow a street to come between the stormwater and the development to be counted as the acreage? That's a policy decision. I think you made, at least the board at the time made the policy decision. That was a reasonable explanation in terms of counting that lot towards, you could use the stormwater to solve the stormwater problem. You could use the land for the area requirement. So if you agree if that's a good policy, then this proposed ordinance backs it up. Same with the parking. I think we heard from Hubdy at the time that they didn't need the parking, in their opinion, in terms of the parking stalls that were necessary for the development based on their experience. However, we felt at a staff level, we needed to get closer in order to meet the City of Middleton parking standards at the time. In order to do that, regardless if they think they needed them or not, we thought it was reasonable, and I think the policy decision was made, reasonable at the Planning Commission board at that time. It was reasonable to count that at least half the parking lot that was across the street from it. This formalizes that administrative decision that I made. So I think if, at that point, it was good policy, and I think now is your chance to weigh, was it good policy or bad policy? If you want to postpone this, I think you can do that too, but I think you're reaffirming the decision that was already made.
And just going back to the height restrictions, just so that everyone is aware, we have, in the proposal that staff has provided, we have made a distinction between the R5, O3, and C1 districts and the industrial districts, because we have identified in the R5, O3, and C1 in the draft documents 4 different standards that would apply to height restrictions or buildings over 45 feet within the R5, O3, and C1 districts. We took a couple of those standards off for the industrial districts because we didn't think that they were appropriate for those districts. So in the draft documents, we have made a distinction between the zoning districts and what's appropriate in one from our standpoint and what's inappropriate in the industrial districts.
Okay, I'm gonna reserve my comments and push this down to you at the end, Brad, as the new guy back on and what your thoughts are.
First off, encourage that we're really taking the villagers' voice to heart, to the decisions and regulations that we hold. I think it's fantastic that we're addressing them because people are using their commentary to allow us to grow this city at the rate and the style that we feel is best. So thank you for all the clarifications, because I've been reading those editorials as well and getting that, because we sit here as commissioners and we need to listen to your voice, and we are always sometimes looking in at all the regulations. We go by the guidance of the attorney, and we want to make sure that we can abide by all these regulations. So there's always been a learning curve for us here on this side, and we want to make sure we abide by those regulations. So thank you for the detailed explanations. Moving forward, we want to make sure that the decisions we make here will really plan out our future for the village of Waunakee. So a lot at stake here, and we appreciate the passion and drive that you're bringing.
Susan? Any comments?
Zoning is so complicated, and I've worked in this industry for more years than I want to say, and it even gets me confused, but because it is very complicated. And I do rely on our legal counsel to guide us and our staff. It's really important because they have the in-depth knowledge. I understand the fear of change, and I understand, where people are coming from. But I do think that what we're doing is going to improve what we have today and create some limits that we don't have, such as you've said, if you really read it. And one thing about Hovde is unique in terms of that lot. I wouldn't normally approve a project that had a lot somewhere else, but that's a lot we wanted as a public parking lot, and we didn't want to pay for it. We didn't have the money, and he needed it. And one thing you have to remember in these mixed-use projects with retail, when you have underground parking, you can't let the retail employees and the customers in there because you ruin the security of the residents. So it's hard for a project along a main street to provide parking for those retailers. This would be great, this for employees who are working in those shops and for their customers. Customers would be more attuned to walking. I doubt very many residents are gonna wanna walk that far. They're gonna be accommodated on site. You have to rent those apartments because they're expensive and they're not gonna wanna leave them vacant. And if the market, especially with our winters, you're gonna want it to be underground parking. I do not want to see any project encroach upon our single-family residential neighborhoods so that people spill out into the streets and take the parking away from residents. I would never support that. I don't think any of us would support that. And I don't see where this would create that situation. I don't think we would approve a project like that. There are some other things I'd like to talk about later, which we may have to start looking at just to make sure that doesn't happen. Because we have businesses now that can't accommodate their customers and their employees. Because we have not provided for parking, and we have got to look at that whole parking. I'm glad we're doing this study. I was on Planning Commission, I don't know how many years ago, 20 or so, where we talked about where we needed parking downtown in order to accommodate customers so that the businesses could survive and also they didn't go in, and we weren't able to come up with a solution that everybody could agree to. So I really want to see us do that. And relative to stormwater detention, I mean, we are going to look very carefully at any project relative to that. We always have. In fact, aren't we 100%?
We are in certain areas.
In certain areas. I mean, Waunakee has been more restrictive than most communities.
Than required by law.
Than required by law. And I've been very proud of that fact, having been on Public Works. And we've had flooding in this village, thank goodness. I mean, it's amazing what's happened in this Thane County community. But we didn't have any
Correct. And to your point, I think if we'd had similar
I'm
rains
shocked we
20
didn't.
years ago, we would have had flooding, but
'Cause
we've
we
been
had
pretty,
it 20, yeah.
yeah, we've been pretty progressive in terms of providing
We should be
stormwater
very happy.
solutions.
So, I mean, I think we all here want to protect the village. We want to retain character, but there is going to be change. There's no way not to. People aren't going to say, I will never sell my property to someone who's going to change it. Nothing's going to happen to it, no matter if you have a single-family house or whatever, particularly on a main street. Because who knows what the state's going to do to that street that we have no control over. So I just hope you could work with us and trust us a little bit, and because I think what we're doing is probably good.
Okay, Chris?
I think they both summed it up pretty well. I wasn't on the Plan Commission when the Hovde project went through, so I can appreciate people's viewpoint of, this appears to be almost closing a loophole. I don't want to say it that way, but that's what came to mind as far as just making sure that the Hovde project went through, and here's how it's applicable now. But I think you summed it up very well, what the changes actually are. That it would have gone through no matter what, and I appreciate you bringing that up and explaining it to us so that we can all understand, especially me, because I wasn't here when that went through. So that really helps me out a lot. I guess that's about it.
Joe?
I'm very torn on this entire thing. And one of the things that really gets me is, we're talking about 45 feet, 55 feet. Without having the 55-foot thing in there, I can understand that somebody may come in and say, hey, I want 65. As soon as you put something in writing, there's instantly this, oh, well, I can go to 55. Yeah, I got to abide by these rules. Now, whether that's good or bad, I don't know. I guess it's probably good to have that in there. But how many people are we going to have that are going to come and try to push right up to that 55-foot mark because it's here? There's some areas where I'm not so sure that it particularly applies. So we could do a little bit of
tweaking with that, I suppose. If we get into the density and whether things are, off-site, I think the Cross Street extension is a fantastic example of where that really applies well. I'm hesitant because 500 feet is a decent distance, and, we really have to make sure that we're on our game to make sure that this doesn't get abused one way or another. And then the last one, which one was it here? The different heights. I definitely appreciate the example of the 35 and 45, and you can go up to the 45, but you're still not going above what is normally allowed in that particular area. So I think that's a good thing. Exactly how I will vote on this yet, I have very little idea. I could very well go either way, just because it doesn't feel quite solid to me yet. And I know we've looked at it a couple of times, but.
Okay. Well,
Can I mention one more thing? There's a comment on floors versus ceilings, or floors versus stories. And historically, communities have always used floors to control height, and they found out that that wasn't a good idea because floors today can be 16 feet high. And then if you get 5 stories, you can have a really tall building. So they switched it, and they put more controls on it. And I think we have that here with what we're drafting, because communities have gotten caught in that. So that's a change that actually be positive. I know logically, initially you think that's what it should be, but when you look at how buildings are built today, very tall ceilings. And an apartment building, you do not build anything that's less than 10 feet minimum and that's without what's above that floor for mechanicals and everything else. So that's important to understand. And then also, the way this is written, we're saying shall not exceed in the commercial district 45, or anything that's above 45, they have setbacks, right?
Well, and
Where
so.
do we control step backs, maybe in the back of a building or adjacent? That's in what part of all of our ordinances can we control that if you've got a really small?
Step backs?
Setbacks, they call setbacks, step backs.
Your building top.
You're talking about the top of the building?
The upper floor
Well,
is
you know,
stepping
because
back.
it's not a
Well,
box.
I'd
We don't
say
like boxes.
right now, we would probably do it during the site plan process, although we don't have any ordinances that specifically get at that issue. One of the things that, I guess, there's 2 things that I wanted to point out thus far based on the comments. The first is, when we talk about this dwelling unit density, I just want to make clear that everyone understands that it says lot area may include. It does not say shall include. So we are retaining discretion here. We're not binding ourselves on this, and I think that that's very important to point out. The other thing is, when we're talking, and now I'm focused specifically on the R5, O3, and C1 districts and the proposed changes, keep in mind that we are allowing for the potential by CUP to go over the 45, and we're capping it at 55, but we have some pretty restrictive language in B, C, and D of those regarding what's going to be over 45 feet. And I just wanted to point that out. It's not like you can have, for example, one of them is all parts of the building that are above 45 feet and shall be setback a minimum of 30 feet from the road right away. You got the total square footage of the building that is above 45 feet cannot exceed 25% of the total square footage of the first floor. So it's not like you're going to have however many stories, a building that looks the same going all the way up to the 55 feet. Once you get over that 45 feet, the stuff that's taller than 45 feet is going to be much smaller than what's on the first floor.
And the use is accessory.
Yes.
So it's not more apartments.
On behalf of Jason Valerius,
Yes.
why don't you tell everybody who you are? And stuff?
Andrew Bremer, I'm a senior planner with MSA. Jason's a colleague of mine. Village attorney just covered one of my points that I wanted to bring up because I hadn't really heard it mentioned yet, which were those items B, C, and D, and how much, if somebody is proposing to exceed 45 and go to 55, how much of that gets really restricted by B, C, and D. in that case. The other item that I didn't hear mentioned that I would bring up relating to the third change and having to apply the more restrictive height requirements of an abutting district is that as written, that applies to a more restrictive district across the street or an alleyway, which I didn't hear anybody mention that yet. So it's not just sort of on your side lot line, it could also be across the street. So if across the street is 35, you'd have to be 35 on that side as well. So wanted to point that out in addition to when you consider section 2 there, section 1 also applies, which you already have in the ordinance, and it's on page 69, which is the setback of the building has to match the more restrictive district as well. So you're keeping the setback more restrictive, you also would have the height be more restrictive and to match what is potentially across the street, which item 1, which you currently have an ordinance, that doesn't apply to things across the street, it's just abutting.
Okay, so my comments in regards to this, and if I'm long-winded, I apologize up front with this. So when the village was created, it took about 140 some odd years for us to become one of the top 10 places in the country to raise a family. The boards before us were very good with their planning and how they laid out our village and went about it in a great way. I personally don't want to change and make Waunakee not a top place to live. But part of being a great place to live is people wanting to come here. And all that sprawl that you see with Sun Prairie, and I've gone around and looked at all the different communities that people are bringing up that we don't want to turn into Sun Prairie and we don't want to turn into this. I don't want to turn into that either. That's Waunakee. I bleed purple. And I firmly believe that these changes are good for our community. Our attorneys are telling us, and I have to listen to them very carefully when they're advising on how we're making tighter rules and regulations. Not opening it up to be easier, not opening it up for the developers, making it easier for the builders. It's not the intent. When we looked at this, it's because we wanted to make sure we had good policy on the books. And we didn't have these types of arguments that are out in our community when the Hovde project was going on in the Main, what was it called?
Madison and Main?
No, Terrence.
Main Street Waunakee LLC.
Main Street Waunakee LLC. I'm not supposed to call it T-Wall property. So I'm very clear on that. When we're looking at all of these restrictions, I don't even like to hear restriction. Okay, I think of my parents. In all my life, the restrictions that they put on until I became an adult. None of us like restrictions, okay? But we're actually putting restrictions on right now that are a little bit tighter. And a difficult thing for me is that we have so many positive, great things about our community, and simply by putting things in the paper ahead of time, before we've even had this meeting to discuss it with everyone, is just that bothers me about the political scene, because that's just a political tactic to put it out there in front of people that they don't have all the facts and all the information yet. When we have a state law change, we have to consider that. We can't just ignore it. So when our attorneys come to tell us these things, we're going to listen. We have to. All right? It's not that we're trying to make the community worse or get better. Actually, it is to get better. I always want it to be improving. What can we do to improve? Mrs. Ashmore brought up the traffic on Main Street. You know, I went to Lodi at rush hour and went down their main drag, and guess what they had? Backed up all the way out to almost out of town at their four-way stop. I went into Sun Prairie, going to Sun Prairie's downtown area right now. Well, they've had a different situation because they had a tragedy happen there, but same thing, backed up. Go to DeForest and take the Windsor, go through Windsor down there at rush hour time, backed up. It's busy. Anytime you have a main street that's going through a community, it's going to be busy naturally. And when people go to live there, I hope they would understand that and know that. All right, we're not trying to make the traffic situation worse. How can we make it better? All right, I've challenged a lot of people on how do we make our traffic situation better on Main Street? What are we gonna do to do that? Okay, changing our height ordinance? You're saying, what is height ordinance that have anything to do with traffic? Well, we're putting more people there, right? because that's gonna automatically bring more traffic as a result of it. That may be true. But if we expand out and use all of our farmland up, put people out there, is that a better solution? Or should we just not let any other development occur in the village? Is that what we're looking at doing? And stop any developing, okay? That's generally not gonna be good for our tax base, frankly, with the way the system's set up. I might be setting myself up to ridicule with my statements tonight, but I do believe that this committee, the village board, has no hidden agenda to make the village worse, or to make your lives worse. It's to make our community a better and stronger community. We just had to go through a tragedy. Everybody knows that in our community. First gun shooting in my lifetime here. And I don't believe we've had any before that. Does that have anything to do with housing? They lived in a condominium apartment. Does that mean it's that we put those in there, that was a bad thing? No. There's grieving that's going on in our community still to this day, and it will continue. I do believe this is a good thing that we're setting restrictions on here. I do believe our attorney when he's saying this is a good policy that we're moving towards. If you listened, he also stated that we need to make some tweaks still on parts of it when our studies are done. So the next question is, should we be just waiting for those studies to be done to implement this? Or do we put ourselves at risk in waiting? That's my question, because I know that that's been out in the community. Why don't you just wait and see how the Hovde project goes and see what that. Is there a sense that we should be getting these done now, or would it be okay to wait till that's completed? Or does it really matter?
Well, I would recommend that you move forward now. The height restrictions, I don't think are going to have anything to do with the parking. And again, we're placing limits that do not exist right now within our code. If you look at all of these different ordinance changes, we are within 9 of the 10 identifying additional restrictions. And so if the idea is we don't want more restrictions, then I would take them out. My concern with respect to the height is we get an application from somebody that says, I want to put in a 60-foot building. Do we have to approve it? No. What's going to be our basis for denying it, and are there going to be objective reasons for denying it? I heard someone say that we should cap it at 45. That would be a different change. I think that you would be taking away some flexibility. I mean, this is what I approach things obviously different than residents. As the attorney, I've been working with you guys for 14 years. I think the decisions that all of the committees that I've been involved in, the village board and the staff, are all what Chris says they are. They're for the benefit of the village. As the attorney, I want you to have as much discretion as possible to make those decisions. So on a certain level, these restrictions kind of conflict with that because then they're taking away your discretion. At the same time, I think it's positive on the height restrictions in light of what the state law is, because I think we're really putting in some protections, and I think the protections are consistent with a lot of the statements that the public have said. Some people from the public would want it to be 45 feet instead of 55, but at least you're putting a cap on it. And I do believe that when you look at B, C, and D, I mean, these are pretty restrictive when you talk about anything over 45 feet. The last ordinance change, the one related to the step downs, that's not something that's in the code right now. And so you're putting greater restrictions on a developer or property owner than it exists right now. And when it comes to the density issue, I agree with Kevin. I think this is primarily a policy decision. I do not like the current code because I think that I agree with Kevin's interpretation. Obviously, some people do not. If you don't agree with it, then from my standpoint, it gets to the fact that it is too restrictive, and then you don't get to exercise your discretion and do what's best for the village. I think when you look at that code language, it talks about may include. You're not giving up your discretion with the may. We're not saying we have to do it. But it puts on the books what Kevin said in his interpretation and gives you the flexibility to do something if you believe it makes sense. And the history that I have in working with the village is that's exactly what you do. And so why would you want to take that discretion? Why would you not want to allow that type of discretion?
One thing I'd add, Chris, is if we recommend these changes and the board moves forward with these changes, nothing stops us from making changes again. We've been making zoning changes on a regular basis over the last few years, and we'll continue to do that. We want to be reactive to what's changing within the community.
And the other thing we're changing zoning provisions that are like 20 years old too. It's not like we're changing something that was adopted a few years ago. And that's how it happens for municipalities. I can tell you right now, as a lawyer who represents other municipalities, nobody says to me, go look at your code and find the stuff that you don't agree with or that's problematic. I mean, because that would be too costly, and obviously municipalities, no municipality has the ability to do that. You address these issues as they come up, because from a financial standpoint, that's really the only way you can do it, other than when there's a state law change like we have here. Then I have an obligation to come to you and say, hey, and I'm gonna be honest with you, we got some other provisions within our conditional use language that may need to be tightened up too, but you gotta take it step by step. And because whenever we issue a conditional use, we always want to try to be as objective as possible. And I think that we saw that tonight. We were having a difficulty in the information that was being provided to the Plan Commission related to the hangar. Because I think ultimately what I heard was, if we're going to allow this hangar here, when we determine what the setback is, we want to be able to look at something that's objective that we can hang our hat on. And that's what always makes the most sense. And again, doubling back to the height stuff, that's exactly what we're doing. I would recommend that you approve these changes, or recommend approval of these changes to the village board. And I do think the village board should adopt these 3 ordinances now, because I don't think any of the changes that we'd make in the future, for example, regarding the section on parking, is going to impact any of this.
So my last comment, which, sorry if I got a little worked up. Epic wanted to come to Waunakee at one time. Does everybody know that in the room? Think of if the board had elected to put Epic out by Carlos Stotts and Sons out there, and what that would have changed Waunakee's entire makeup, just like it has Verona. Okay? That's the decisions that we are faced with, and I don't think we're going down that road of what the other cities and municipals are doing at this point. I think we still have our controlled growth, and I think it's a positive thing for us, and this is part of that controlled growth, putting the restrictions on, even tighter. I also forgot to mention Mount Horeb. Middleton, Verona, think of their traffic issues. They all have them. Everybody has traffic issues on their main thing. We have a society that likes to drive. It's pure and simple. We do. If we didn't, and people carpooled and did other things, I don't think we would have the same issues we do. But we don't have that society right now. So I'm going to make the motion to move this forward and approve these as changed to the village board. Okay, we've got a motion and a second.
We'll take the second.
Oh, Sue's got the second. Already. Any other comments? Okay, I'm going to call the question. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
All right. Next, we have our Waunakee Westport Joint Plan Commission items for action. Initial consultation, mini storage units, Spawn 5490, County Highway Q, Town of Westport. Kevin?
We don't have really any detail to go along with this, but there's a suggestion of some mini storage units. I think from talking with the town, they're not supportive at a staff level for these.
Okay.
You guys got an
For your
opinion?
explanation tonight, that was very informative. Thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you. If they're not.
Thank you for your comments tonight as well.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our joint JPC people.
Well, I think you can give me, they're not gonna, Chris will be there tomorrow. You can certainly give Chris and I direction on what you're thinking about mini storage on County Trunk Q.
I defer it to Westport. It's their,
Okay?
I would tend to agree with that. It does feel like a very strange place for it.
Yeah, it's, it's the corridor, the entranceway into the village, so, I think it'd be appropriate for us to comment if you're interested.
It sounded like they weren't even sure they wanted to do storage units. They're open to anything that they could utilize that land for, so.
Okay, I got it.
got it? Okay. next
2
we've got-
is the Andrus additional lot. This is really, I don't think it has a big impact on the village. My sense is that the town staff is not supportive of this change, that it should stay the way it is. It's consistent with the rural development in that area.
Again, that's them.
I suggest that we would defer to Westport on it. Okay.
Public hearing. Do we have to do a
GDP?
public hearing here for this?
No,
Okay.
we already did, so.
I think that's for tomorrow night.
We have to
There's
have a public hearing tomorrow. We're just going off the
Got it.
agenda, so we already
Okay.
talked about that.
Will the Drive Peaceful Valley Parkway Public Information Meeting update?
Yeah, we're gonna have a public information meeting on September 19th. We're trying to publicize it. It is 6 o'clock, Jason?
Yes.
6 to 7, Wednesday, September 19th, 6 PM to 7 PM. The existing speed and stop signs are shown in the packet, and then the proposed changes. Reducing the speed limit on Woodland Drive to 30 miles an hour, removing one stop sign on Peaceful Valley and adding to RRFB. This is what our Public Works Committee said, came up with. They said, go get some public comment and see if this makes sense. So we're having a meeting.
And the police department weighs in on it.
Yep. So no action, we just wanted to make sure our joint planning commission was aware of it. We're trying to publicize the meeting.
Okay, one last motion.
Adjournment?
Motion by Susan Springman, second by Chris Thomas. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Thanks, everybody.